And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Baron.
Shortly before the second anniversary of the Pathfinder Adventure Path actual play podcast, The Glass Cannon, Paizo kind of surprised everyone by announcing that they were the first official Paizo before the second anniversary. So we naturally had a lot of questions, and joining us tonight to talk about, to answer those questions and also talk about GMing with an audience in mind, balancing comedy and adventure during a session, and the rapid rise of the Glass Cannon podcast is the Glass Cannon GM, Mr. Troy LaValle. Hi, Troy.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me. And you said my name right, which never happens.
And I hated myself doing it the whole time.
You wanted to say LaValle, right?
LaValle, exactly.
Real French in there. Yeah, I'm sorry. We're just Southie trash here in New York City. LaValle family. We'll try maybe the next generation switching to something a little more French sounding.
It feels like when somebody says LaValle, you should be like, thanks for trying.
This is great. Thank you guys for having me on. I was saying to you before we went live, our fans are pretty rabid, and they posted last week. They were like, they mentioned you on the No Direction. And I was like, well, I got to reach out to these guys immediately and get on and clear our name, because I'm sure it was dragged through the pipe by everyone.
Yeah, our fans seem to be rather excited for you guys, too. I mean, it seems like a lot of people were excited that we were going to do a team-up episode. So, hey, we're here doing it now.
Here we are.
Minor internet celebrities collide.
Finally.
I mean,
actually, we'd heard about the Glass Cannon podcast, but as I mentioned to you, and don't take this personally, actual play podcasts weren't really my bag. So I didn't listen to it. And then suddenly when it was an official podcast, I was like, oh, I've missed out on something huge. I don't even know how we didn't cross paths earlier, just in the community.
Yeah, and when we first started chatting, I'm in the same boat. I've listened to probably total 4 hours of other actual play podcasts since we've been doing this for over 2 years. I just had trouble getting into them, but it was having trouble getting into them that made me realize, like, I wonder if my friends and I could do this and take it in a different direction. But this is good that, like, if you guys are hearing about it, that was the whole big exciting part for us in this deal with Paizo, was to have people who had never heard of us hear of us. Because when I went to PaizoCon this year, it was nice once in a while, like, hey, it's that guy with the Red Sox hat or something. Like, I think he's with that podcast that 4 people listen to. But now that we're with Paizo, we're getting to reach an entirely different and new audience, which our numbers have been skyrocketing ever since the announcement, which is great.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about building an audience and how just professional your podcast comes off. But before we get ahead of ourselves, What is it about the Glass Cannon podcast that's different from other actual play podcasts?
It's an excellent question. I think there's still a lot of people, whether they've played or not, that any tabletop RPG, there's still a stigma attached to it. Like, if you're a super nerd that played D&D as a kid, or you got into it recently over the years, or you stopped and started, either way, there's still that. It's not like quite the satanic panic anymore, but there's still like, that's like one step below LARPing. I'm not ready for that kind of nerdery. And so right from the outset, I wanted to do something that demystified the whole nerdiness. And so I think that's what we do differently, I guess. We do a lot of cutting each other down, insulting each other. It helps that, like, we're all really good friends, so that sort of fratty camaraderie is just a different voice when people think of what a bunch of guys in their late 30s do, sitting around a table rolling dice and playing pretend. Having it be this certainly very nerdy, but also have a funny element and ribbing on each other. I think that's one of the appeals for sure. You can sense that, like, oh, these guys are really good friends. I want to play this game now that I hear how much fun that they're having.
And you guys do have a lot of fun. I think one of the things I like most about your show is that you all seem to click very well to each other. And I kind of avoided actual play podcasts too, because back when I first tried them, this was like, 10 years ago, when the idea of an actual play podcast was like 5 awkward people breathing heavily into a bad microphone and like the basement echo of the dice. But you put together something special, something great. What do you do that makes it not just so awkward?
Yeah, when I first had the idea and I went to two of the other guys in the show, Joe and Skid, with it, it was really just an excuse to play more Pathfinder. And then the way I roped them into doing it is like, this time we're going to record it and make it a podcast. But my initial thought was like, we probably can just put a Yeti Blue mic in the middle of the room and just we'll make it work. And that's when Joe was like, absolutely not. If we're going to do it, we need to get our hands on professional sound equipment and have everybody have their own microphone, get a mixing board, and do it right. Because and he had listened to a ton of podcasts. I didn't realize until, a couple months into our pre-production, the importance of audio quality. And then once we launched, seeing all the reviews come through on iTunes, almost all of them were like, exceptional audio quality, blah, 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 audio quality. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that really made a difference. I took it for granted. So that's been certainly one of our draws, is right from the start, whether you hear the voiceover guy come in with that tease, this week on the Glass Cannon podcast, it's like, oh, this is different from what I've heard. And then we come in with perfectly clear voices. That audio is definitely a big draw.
Wait, are you the voiceover guy?
No, that was just my impression of him.
That was a good impression.
Well, I've listened to 111 of them, so I've got it down. But Joe is actually a voiceover agent in the city, and he's now my voiceover agent. When we started the podcast, I was with a different agency, and I actually switched over to Joe mid-through. So he has all these voiceover connections with these professional guys. So he was like, I got a guy, he's going to do this tease. Little did Joe know that, like, deciding to do that for episode 1 is now, it takes us probably 2 hours every week just to do that 1-minute tease to every single episode. But I'm like, well, we did it once. We have to do it for every single episode till we stop. But that definitely, when he sent me that first tease, I was like, oh man, this is going to be good. This just sounds like that old trailer guy, Don LaFontaine. It just draws you in with the, and then in terms of how does this show differ from other shows, what's very important for me is, as an actor and as a comedian, as a writer, is pacing. When we play our casual unrecorded games, it's very easy to just kind of like relax, talk to each other and goof off and not really be focused. And then other times you're like, all right, guys, let's focus in. But we can also get to a point in the story where it's like, wait a minute, I don't think you can do that. Let's look up the rule for that. And then you just blow through 10 minutes of people just looking up the rule and whatnot. So we tend to just power through, or we edit out those discussions, because if we only have an hour. Sometimes we go an hour and a half, hour 45 when we're feeling really exciting. You got to get through that. You can't ever have a dull moment. I don't want to do healing on air. We talk about leveling up and powers, but we try to keep that to a minimum as well. It's all about trying to find that balance between telling the story, telling this narrative that I'm trying to tell with the source material that Paizo has provided in the adventure path, having that playful banter that is indicative of all gaming sessions. The greatest gaming sessions we had when we were 13 years old or when we're pushing 40 years old, it's that camaraderie of sitting around a table and goofing off with your friends. That is as important element of the show as telling the story of these characters' journey. And then also trying to explain this very complex game to an audience that we have found since day one has actually never played Pathfinder or any tabletop RPG before. Now, we have certainly plenty of grognards or plenty of people that have been playing it for years, but this was one of the reasons why this really took off. We hit on something very early on that a bunch of people were listening that had never played a tabletop RPG before. So we need to also have those instructional elements as well without making those boring and dragging the show down as well. So finding that balance, juggling all those things in the air in an hour's time, finding a way to do that has been, I think, the secret to the success of the show.
Yeah, so I can understand the audio quality being the thing that people focus on when they're reviewing you, but it really feels like your philosophy that this is a performance. This isn't just the game that you're having on the weekend, but with a microphone. It really is like you're aware of your audience and you are meeting your audience's needs, and you have considered every angle of what your audience could need. That's really impressive.
Yeah, I always tell the guys, like, if we were playing, I run a Jade Regent game for Joe and Skid and Matthew and another friend of ours, and when we're playing our non-recorded games, I always tell, I try to keep it all about them. I want it always to be about them. They're the most important people in the room. And the thing I always impress upon the guys in the podcast is the most important person in the room at all times is the audience. I don't care if you're mad if your character got, like, knocked for 50 hit points and knocked unconscious. I don't care if your character got charmed and taken out of the combat and you're upset right now. I don't care if your character dies. Like, the most important person in the room is always the audience, and that alone has had to kind of, where we still have times, because it happens where a character just gets blasted and one of our guys will get so mad, and I'm like, sorry buddy, this is for the audience. We got to keep it doing it for them, because if people aren't invested in the stories of these characters as well as the emotion of the players, then you lose that interest. There's just so much other stuff out there you can listen to. But I think that's what's been a calling card very early on, is that there is a real emotional connection between the players and their characters. But I always make sure that they don't treat them too preciously, because I'll kill them in a moment's notice, and they just have to be okay with it.
I like that. Online, you'll find debate about whether the GM is more of a director or a producer. Right. You are both director and producer and the GM.
It's like 1940s Hollywood. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's definitely a different way of playing. That's why I really enjoy the rare occasions now when we get to play non-recorded games, because I can just kind of relax and not have to be on all the time. But with this, I have to be, producer, director, conductor, and writer, filling in the holes of this amazing story that Paizo has already created for me.
Now,
so then what about balancing the humor? Because that's definitely the other thing that Glass Cannon is known for. You guys are funny, you've got great chemistry, and it's funny, but humor can also derail the adventure. So how do you balance when to explore a bit and really see how far you can go before you go back to it, and when it's like, haha, okay, but we were saying.
Yeah, I think this is something all GMs can relate to in all their games. Sometimes if the goofing off gets to be too much, you're like, all right, guys, come on, guys, let's bring it back in. And then how do you really – I think a lot of these podcasts can be too silly. A lot of actual play podcasts, they just get too silly too fast, because it's a lot easier to entertain with silly. But one of the things that we try to do is really have those – emotional moments land, whether it be the death of a character, whether it be something that's happening to an NPC or another character, realizing the harsh reality of whatever particular section of Galarian we're in, and really going dark. We actually probably sometimes err on the side of going too dark, but you have to weigh that with the funny as well. A great example is there's a funeral at one point there, and for one of the characters. I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't listened. And it's a very somber moment, and one of the PCs gives this beautiful, heartfelt speech. And it's one of our best improvisers on the show. And someone accidentally hit the gunshot button on Sirenscape, at the end of the funeral, and we all just lost it after this moment. We're all trying to really get into the sadness of it. And sometimes that's a little gift when that happens, because then it breaks the darkness for you. But you have to have both, and that's been something that we've really tried to focus on since day one, is let's go dark. Let's let improv not just be comedy improv, but let improv of really hard, dark emotions sometimes as well. I think that's any good, whether it's Lord of the Rings or a great like the Name of the Wind series or anything like that, you want to be able to have both, I think.
Now, you mentioned improv, and you mentioned acting background. That's something that you and a lot of your players have, and I think that's definitely one of the helps. So what kind of backgrounds do you guys come from?
Well, I've been an actor my whole life, and I moved here from Boston about going on almost 18 years ago to go to grad school and study acting, and then I did theater off Broadway for a long time, and that slowly turned into making these little YouTube videos and whatnot, and then I got into stand-up comedy, and now I've just been kind of doing a little bit of everything. And this podcast was really just another way for me to create content for myself. And so then I bring in a guy like Joe, who is an agent now. He did forensics and speech and debate in college. So he was a national champion standing up in front of a crowd and giving speeches or whatever the heck they do in forensics. I'm not quite sure, but he's always been good at talking in front of a crowd. And then Skid's been an actor his whole life, and also one of the smartest, funniest guys you'll ever meet. And he's been playing nonstop since the Red Box came out. So he's the senior member of the podcast, and he'll get mad at me for saying that. But whereas I stopped for about 20 years, Joe stopped for about 20 years, and Grant and Matthew on the show this was their first adventure path. Well, Grant, this is his second adventure path. They're very, very new to it. Skid never stops. So Skid has this wealth of knowledge that goes back 30 years, which And then you add someone in like Matthew, who's a playwright, who's also studied acting as well, and he is the noob of the group. So it was very important early on to have a guy who can ask questions, because then the audience member that doesn't know kind of takes on Matthew's persona. Like when Matthew asks, wait, how does a 5-foot step work? You can do that during a full attack action. Then he becomes that audience member being like, I don't understand what's going on. Oh, okay. And the way they explain it. And then Grant's wife is like a professional improv comedian. So Grant spent years just around these great improv theaters all over New York. And clearly it's rubbed off on him as well. So having that theatrical background for, in very different ways for all of us has certainly helped. But I think we kind of just lucked into the chemistry of being able to sort of improvise together. It's hard. I go to improv shows all the time, and they're almost all garbage. So I was nervous just doing this, something like this. I mean, honestly, when we recorded the first show, I was thinking to myself, like, let's record a couple of these. If they're terrible, we just won't use them. We'll say, no harm, no foul. And for some reason, it just hit, and I was like, I think we should keep doing this. And now we're stuck with it. And
I'm going to say Rob Sonia in chat says, "Did I miss what Grant does?" You mentioned Grant's wife teaches improv.
She's a improv comedian, and she does shows all over New York City. And Grant works in professional sound design for a nonprofit here in New York. So that helped too, because we were like, hey, let's ask Skid's friend Grant to be in this. Hey, Grant, you want to be a cast member of the show? He's like, sure. Oh, do you guys need audio equipment? Because I have like thousands of dollars of it at my disposal. And we were like, yep. That certainly helped right off the bat. But yeah, I don't know if Grant's had any formal training, but he constantly amazes me when he will just nail something. I'm like, Grant, I didn't know you had it in you. But then you got a guy like Skid, who literally, I have to cut out half the things Skid says because everything he says is gold, and the show would just run on for 2 hours of Skid just bebopping and scatting with some pretty amazing lines, some of which are just not appropriate for the show. We have to cut out, but. Yeah, I've lucked into a very good group. And the thing is, if we ever do more projects, I'd like to expand the group. But the chemistry is so important. Like, we have this chemistry of 5 people right now. If I add in one other element or 2 other elements, or if I take a person out and put another person in, it's going to drastically change the tone of the show. But I would like to expand beyond the 5 white guys in a room sort of group. I think it would be nice to, get some other views in there as well. So I think the little tidbit, if we ever do, when we do a second podcast, we're definitely going to shake things up a little bit and get some new and exciting voices in.
All right. Well, I'm going to definitely want to talk to you about the fact that you said when you start another podcast, because that sounds like plans are in motion. And I want to talk to you about editing, but I do want to reiterate that we do have a live audience.
Yes.
And it's a very active chat right now, but people are more engaging with each other and responding to what we're saying. So I want to encourage anyone, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask them. We will be collecting them as the episode goes on, and we'll be plugging them in whenever we can. We kind of want to take your questions as often as possible. But Troy, so you were saying that you edit out a lot of, content, but I'm amazed because when I first listened to it, I went into it assuming it was going to be heavily edited, and it sounded perfectly smooth. I've listened to the first 5 episodes. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. Yeah. And I would have guessed that you guys just have this amazing chemistry and do no editing. So is that something that's happened later on, or are you really just that good at the cutting?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, one of my side jobs that I have when I'm not acting and performing is I do video and sound editing. So that helps to be able to sort of take huge chunks out sometimes and not let you guys notice what we're doing. And that's very difficult because Sirenscape is being recorded live, but we found a way to do it where you can't really notice it. I wouldn't say we heavily edit, but like sometimes it'll be either a joke that I feel like it fell flat or it was too inappropriate, or like sometimes I give out information to the PCs that I wish I didn't give out, and so I'll cut that out of the show. Or somebody rolls 10d6 and they're counting the damage die, I cut that out. But I try not to edit too much actual content. One thing we've just learned over time and tried to get better at is to just make sure the minute you open your mouth, you're saying something relevant and exciting and contributing to the momentum of the show. Because, I probably spend maybe 3 to 4 hours editing a 1-hour show. And Joe does, I edit four episodes, and then Joe edits 4, and we switch back and forth. And I know Joe spends at least the same amount of time as I do, but we try not to cut out too much. It's really if it's dead time, a bad joke, an inappropriate joke, or just, a mistake, I'll be like, wait, say that again, the mic pops and stuff like that. But in terms of actual, like, oh, we went on a really weird tangent right there, I should cut that out, that really doesn't happen as often as you'd think.
A lot of people in chat are curious what's too inappropriate. Now, keep in mind, we're an all-ages show.
Right,
so
right.
Is there a way you could summarize what's inappropriate versus what's...
Sure. I mean, well, what I will say in terms of that is, like, we had to learn through our mistakes in terms of, like, what was going to be, good for an audience of all people and not just what we find funny. You know what I mean? And so I think in those first 18 episodes or so, there was some times where we went in directions that we realized later, like, there's no reason to go that way. I mean, there's 2 episodes in particular that have come with warnings because we were just dealing with very dark subject matter, and that just comes out of this world. Like, you kind of can't deny that there are some really dark things that go on with orcs and raiding villages and whatnot. And we kind of just, in our natural improvisation, went down these paths and then realized later, like, all right, let's avoid that, because in the moment we were just really getting into it. And then later on realized, like, all right, anytime we think we're going in that direction, let's just turn it back and go this way, because we don't want to scare people off because they're like, I don't want this subject matter. We want this show to be an escape for people. We want people to be able to listen to this, to learn a little bit more about Pathfinder, hopefully start playing Pathfinder themselves, and also just take a break from whatever's going on in their life. If they can laugh for an hour or cry for an hour, that'd be great. So there's no reason to get too dark.
Cry for an hour?
We got people all the time like, I cried at episode blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, come on, really? But then sometimes I'm listening back and I'm tearing up myself. I'm like, man, that was good. That death scene.
I can see the potential for drawing some tears, because in the first episode there's a murder, and it's with an NPC that they only had one scene with. Right. And it didn't affect me. It didn't bring me to tears, but it was like, that has impact. That was well done, and I was taking, like, mental jamming notes when it happened. So I can see if you, like, really went all out and it was an NPC that people were very familiar with, crying, but not for the whole hour.
No, but I mean, there are some episodes coming up, if you're able to continue to listen, that will really touch you in ways that you didn't think possible. And I'm still shocked that we were able to do it. But it's just people become attached to these characters. And when something goes wrong for them, be it death or worse, I think it's like watching, I always refer to Lost as one of my favorite shows of all time. Like, you feel for those characters when they die at the end of season 3 or 4 like that. You're like, no, I don't want to lose that character. And so, depending on how emotional you get, I think it's natural to kind of feel for these losses.
Now, you mentioned that you're not only playing Pathfinder, you're playing Adventure Path. Specifically, you started off playing Giant Slayer. So what do you play on the show? And why did you choose to run an official adventure path instead of doing something original?
I've always just been infatuated with the adventure paths. I mean, I wish I had the time to play every single one of them. They're so unbelievably well written. And I always say to the guys, like, nothing we write would be as good as what their team of professional Pathfinder writers are going to come up with. So when we decided, we're trying to decide what to do, I really was just kind of spitballing with Joe and Skid to see, like, what would you be what kind of adventure are you interested in? And at that point, Giant Slayer was just about to be released, and it just had this classic sense of good, evil, and, like, characters going on an adventure to basically save the world. And I just thought that was something so universal that everyone could understand. I mean, we thought about doing Iron Gods, but we were like, I'm sure Iron Gods is amazing. It's one of the most well-reviewed ones that's come out in the past 10 years or past couple years. But we didn't know if we wanted to add in that sci-fi element. We kind of wanted it to be a classic sword and board story of 4 adventurers going out to save the world. And as I continued reading it, I was like, yeah, this is going to be perfect for what we're trying to do. And then what I try to do is take the story that Paizo's written and really connect it to the backstories that the players have created, because I'm lucky in that I have players that create these amazing, elaborate backstories. And so connecting them to the events of the world is another thing that's become one of our calling cards. I mean, there's one of the big bads in the show now is not in the adventure path, but came out of a backstory of one of the characters, and that character is as important to the sort of story as the main ones that are written into the adventure path.
We have a couple of questions from chat. The first one is Troy Sucks. That comes from Murdertron 3000.
That would be Skid, who wrote that. Thank you, Skid. Thanks for chiming in.
Now, there's no punctuation, so maybe it's Troy Sucks?
Right, it could be a question mark. Knowing Skid, it's probably not. It's probably a declarative sentence.
He did start it with question, colon. Mm-hmm. But no, the real question. We have Bargle Slayer is saying, how do you prepare those cinematic scenes for the show?
The cinematic scenes. What I try to do is bullet point what I want to say, and then before the session, the days leading up to it, I'll just start talking. Walk around New York. I'll walk around my apartment, just talking out how I think I'm going to say it to the guys. But oftentimes it just comes out in the moment. Like I have sort of, if it's going to be a big moment, I'll have the sort of beginning, middle, and end of where I want it to go, and then I'll just fill out the pieces in the middle. But yeah, in terms of, I honestly try not to do too much prep because I want to be in the moment. And in terms of the cinematic stuff, be in the moment and react and try to tell the story as best I can based on the information the players are giving me.
Murdertron 3000 is just going crazy in chat. It's a little distracting. It's all caps. Here it says, Grant is here taking over. Lay down, Skid. And then it says, shut up. I think to himself, I'm going to have to ignore Murdertron 3000 for a bit.
Do you guys have mods? Let's kick these guys out of the chat.
All right, yeah. Can somebody take care of this
they're
unruly chatter?
Right. Another question we have from chat is, for this group, what is the next AP? Have you chosen it yet? Are you waiting to see what Paizo publishes between now and then?
Probably our most asked question. So once we hit 10,000, our $10,000 goal in our Patreon, we have promised to deliver a second podcast. I'd be lying if I wasn't already starting the preparation for that now. I would say, and I'll go and say it live in front of you guys, my vague answer to this. It's either going to be, I'm either going to be running the first Starfinder adventure path that comes out. And a lot of this depends on the timing of when this happens. Or a classic Pathfinder adventure path, or one that has not yet been released yet. A lot of it is going to depend on the timing of when we actually do it. Like if we hit our $10,000 goal by Gen Con, then I better get busy and quit all my other jobs and learn the Starfinder system. But, if we don't hit that $10,000 goal until next June, by then they could already be gearing up to release their second Starfinder AP, or some crazy new Pathfinder adventure path that I don't even know about yet. That sounds even more exciting to me than space stuff. But I wish I could give a better answer to that. But one of those three things, either Starfinder, something that hasn't been released, or a classic. Not Rise of the Rune Lords, not Curse of the Crimson Throne, but maybe something, from those earlier days, after it was converted from 3.5.
You mentioned hitting goals. What kind of crowdfunding are you doing?
So we have a Patreon, patreon.com/glasscannon, and we launched in March and hit our first two goals of 2,500 and 5,000 in 34 days, I think. So now we're about to crest $7,000 a month, and once we hit 10,000 is when we launched the second podcast. At 2,500, we started providing new content. So we did a live show here at a game store in New York, and we're able to record that and release a few episodes of that. That's Patreon exclusive to our $5 donors and up. And recently, this is another surprise, we recorded something else that is going to be going up on there very, very soon to our $5 subscribers and up. That all I will say is I am not the one GMing, and it's going to be pretty exciting. It came out really good. I'm a player instead of a GM in this one. And then we're hoping to do video content. That's the other thing. Once we hit 5,000, we said we'd do video content. Well, we hit 5,000 a month and a half ago, and we haven't been able to launch any really great new video content yet, because I want the video content to take on the same quality of our audio show. It'd be nothing for we put up Twitch videos all the time of us just playing Dark Souls or playing Horizon Zero Dawn and whatnot. And those go up and those are fine. But we want to do something that's just a little bit different. to be able to compete with the types like Critical Role and, Harmon Quest and whatnot. We want to be able to play in that ballpark. So I want the video content that we make to be of that quality. So it'll probably start out as like short form stuff and then expand to who knows what.
But when you say of that quality, do you also mean of that idea? Like Harmon Quest has animation over the actual play?
Right. That I don't know yet. I mean, we have a bunch of ideas that we're working on that I can't I wouldn't want to divulge yet until they're more fully formed. But I mean, before I even heard about Harmon Quest, we were actually talking with someone to do like an animated version of it. And then a week later, I heard about Harmon Quest, and I was like, well, that idea's taken. And same thing. I don't want to just broadcast us playing the Glass Cannon podcast or the next XP, because that's what Critical Role does. I want to be able to do something that hasn't been done yet, just like we did with the Glass Cannon podcast. I mean, there's a sea of actual play podcasts out there, but there's a reason there's only like 5 or 6 of them that are really, really doing well. It's because they're doing something that's different. It's not just a mic sitting in a room with a bunch of people, cracking chip bags and just burping on the mic and whatnot. We want our video content to be in that same vein, something that hasn't quite been done yet, or do something that's out there in a different way. You haven't heard those podcasts? There's just people burping on mic. There's nothing less attractive than just a loud belch during a podcast.
I've heard them. I just don't listen to them.
See? That's why they're not doing well. Too many burps.
10 Lawn Gnomes asks, is For Highbury a drinking game yet?
It should be. It certainly should be. But no, not yet. But we did have, after our first live show, we went to a bar across the street. There was probably about 40 people, more than half of which flew into New York just to watch our live show. And we went to the bar, and we probably cleared that place out with everybody screaming for a Highbury every 5 minutes. So eventually we just had the whole bar to ourselves. So you can thank Joe for coming up with that.
I have a few more questions. I have a few more questions about this second podcast you're launching, but I don't know, is that something that you're far enough along that you could answer questions, or would you rather focus on Glass Cannon questions?
Yeah, I mean, only because there's nothing really to talk about right now, in terms of what we're going to be doing, because I haven't decided what I'm going to be running. But, I mean, it's going to be, people should expect it to be, is if they enjoy Glass Cannon, they're going to enjoy this.
Now,
all right, then. Can we start about when you launched and how you built your audience? Especially, I was surprised to hear that a lot of them are not Pathfinder players.
Yeah, we were shocked early on when we started getting emails left and right from people like, never played tabletop RPG before, never played Pathfinder, and now I am in 17 games and it's taken over my life, and I've lost my marriage, and I gave away my kids because so much. Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, I'm sure Pathfinder has ruined many a marriage, but that's what happens. Is the game is just so addictive. And I mean, it happened to me when I got back into it. I was like, yeah, all right, I'll come and hang out with your nerdy friends and play a little Pathfinder. And then a week later, I was like, can we get 6 games going, because I am hooked on this. So a lot of people who had never played before were emailing us like, how do we get involved? How can I play? How do I find a group? And so we just slowly but surely started matching people up together, like, well, if you live in this area, we know somebody else that lives in this area, you should tweet at us, and and that's been really fun. And I think that's one of the reasons we were able to sort of create a relationship with Paizo, because we realized very early on we were creating fans for them, and not like just stealing fans from 5e. Hopefully we've done that as well. But creating fans out of people who've never played tabletop RPGs before. And that, to me, those are the prime people you would want falling in love with your game, having no knowledge of, any previous, and no bad habits, as it were. So yeah, that still surprises me that we have people who have never played before, because when you talk about this game, there's just so much complexity to it, and we try our best to make it as accessible as possible. But still, there's times when you're in the middle of a battle and it sounds like you're trying to teach someone Mandarin. So I can imagine some people just eyes rolling back in their head when they listen to some of the early stuff, as we're still finding our feet in combat. Like, how do you make combat exciting? 15, it's a hit. All right, 2 points of damage. That can be so boring. So we had to pump that up. All right, I come up and I slash it with my sword. 15. hit. All right. And then I kind of stick him right under his chest and he bleeds. 4 points of damage. All right. Next turn, making something that we take for granted more exciting. And that's actually helped our non-recorded games as well. And we try to tell people, like, you should be recording your games anyways, because then you can listen back and learn from what you're doing. And I'm sorry, I am literally sweating my face off right now, so I apologize for the glare.
I feel you right now, too. I had to turn my AC off before we record every episode. Now, I want to go on the opposite of that. I'm sure a lot of your fans... I'm really excited to hear that you're getting all of these fans who've never played before, but you've also got to have the opposite. Like, how does it feel GMing something that a whole bunch of really old grognards are going to be listening and judging you on?
Yeah, we were very fortunate in which a lot of people didn't start voicing their opinions until we got really popular. And it's like, whoa, hold on. That's not how you do spell combat, spell strike. No, you can't do this during that attack. And honestly, to a certain point, we really enjoy it because we try not to drag things down with rule stuff. And so sometimes we make mistakes constantly, but then we always try to call ourselves out, whether it be on our Tumblr. Joe writes a column once in a while called We Are Stupid. But as we've gotten more busier and whatnot, we haven't been able to keep up with that. So now we post up an episode on Facebook and we have people just telling us all the things we do wrong. And frankly, I think it's great because it not only helps us be better players, but it helps other people who are learning the game be like, oh, so that's how a barbarian's rage works. Those are temporary hit points. Now I get it. But, there are certain... we've been lucky for the most part. There have not been a lot of people that have been real jerks to us. Even the rules lawyers out there, I think they come from a good place. Like, they want to share their knowledge and teach us because they just can't help themselves. They need to tell us what we're doing wrong. Which is also, a lot.
People feel the need to have a relationship with the people that they have podcasts with. And sometimes... Sure. That's their opening. They're like, oh, there's something I can start a conversation with. But then as like the content provider who's getting a deluge of this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing wrong from strangers to them, it's weird. It's like it's one-way familiarity.
Right. The worst is when we get emails from people who are like just listening to the show now and they're like, in episode 12, you did this wrong. I'm like, well, why don't you listen to the next 100 and see if we corrected our mistake before you tell us what we did wrong in episode 12. But, knock on wood, we've been very fortunate. Like, nobody's really been mean to us per se. I'm sure it'll come. Don't worry. But right now, they've been good.
All right. Well, we just had questions? All kinds of questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Param, you got some?
One here coming from Paydronian. Question, Troy, what is your favorite movie and why is it Jurassic Park?
So it's a long-running joke in the show that I've never watched Jurassic Park, and I refuse to ever watch it, mostly because I'm not interested in cartoon dinosaurs. But my favorite movie of all time is Annie Hall, and I'm a big Woody Allen guy. When I was a kid, I was not allowed to watch R-rated movies, so I just never got into them. I didn't sneak and watch them, and then I just wasn't really interested in movies at all because anything that was good was R-rated. So I was like, meh. And then I started working in video stores when I was like a pretentious 23-year-old, and so I only watched foreign films. I was watching like French New Wave stuff and Bergman flicks and Tarkovsky and whatnot, so I missed out on all of these classic movies that everyone quotes and watches all the time. But Woody Allen is my bread and butter.
We got another question.
Go ahead.
Somebody wants us to really ask this question. It's from Yokai Yojimbo. Wants to know, Do you have a contingency plan in the event of a TPK to prevent gaps in weekly releases?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I honestly think by the time we end the show, we will have a TPK. I think it's relatively inevitable. And I've thought about that. Like, people ask us, are you just going to stop and start a new adventure path? Absolutely not. Like, this story, the story of Giant Slayer, has to be told. So I already have multiple contingency plans in mind for if, like, next week's episode there was a TPK. I have an idea how I would start the next episode, and the story would pick up. I mean, people always get nervous when characters die or leave or whatever, and we bring in a new character. They're like, oh, I hate this new character. And then a couple episodes in, that's my favorite character. And so I trust us now at this point, if a character dies or if every character dies, to be able to keep going and sort of seamlessly introduce new people that fit into this world that we've created.
Now, are you the kind of person that will be seduced by a percolating idea and you'll just TPK them on purpose just so you can have that next episode?
I try to let the dice really rule me, to a fault probably. Like, I don't fudge rolls. I let the dice fall where they may. It could happen. I mean, these guys are fighting giants. That's the thing. It's like right now they're very low on, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but right now they're really in a bad position with healing. And so you fight a couple giants and they're like, we got these guys, range combat, don't have to worry about this. But once a giant with a scythe and a ×4 crit gets up in their grill and crits, and then that guy is like down to -10 hit points with a con of 12 or whatever. And then the next person is like, I can't heal them. They're going to bleed out to, like, bad stuff is going to happen. They've just been kind of lucky lately. But I would love a TPK. People always talk about a TPK. They write about it in the book, but I've never heard of an actual TPK. I'd love to have the audience hear something like that.
And I've had 2 in a row.
2 in a row?
This last month.
That's amazing.
Those are Pathfinder Society. They're not Adventure Paths.
Yeah, but those are 3-year-old characters that they've hanged on to for.
Yeah, that's true.
I thought you were playing with 3-year-olds.
No.
Wow, that's crueler than me.
I am ruthless.
Take that, toddler.
Serves you right for taking magic missile.
I'm surprised you say that you don't do any fudging, because with as much of it as a performance of this, I would think that the effort to fudge for dramatic purpose would be very, very teasing.
Yeah, I mean, I say I don't fudge. I try not to. I'm certainly not going to fudge to save a character's life. Like, I will fudge if I think it's going to be better for the story, but I don't fudge momentous occasions on the show, because then I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the game itself. I'm dishonoring the luck system that's in place. But it's tough. It's definitely not easy, just finding that balance. It's actually made me a better GM, though, is because I've got to spread the destructive love amongst the party.
We have a question about house rules from Tenlon Gnomes. Are there any house rules other than bottle caps that you use the most? And actually, do you mind summarizing the bottle caps rules? Because you haven't done that in the episodes I've listened to.
Yeah, so bottle caps is something that our GM, when I first got back into Pathfinder, that was the system he used. And basically, if you do something really cool in combat, usually it's like a great role-playing moment. He's like, all right, you get a bottle cap, and you can turn that bottle cap in to be able to roll 2 d20s and take the better roll, or to have me roll 2 d20s and take the worse roll. So it's like, when you really need that perception check, or you really need a hit in this moment, you hopefully will have a bottle cap, and you turn it in, you roll 2 and take the better result. And now it's become a thing, and we actually, one of our Patreon rewards is we have custom-made bottle caps with different images from the show, whether it be logos or some of the artwork that we've had done for the Patreon on there. And there's all different tiers of the bottle caps that uses the World of Warcraft system, like common, uncommon, elite, rare, ultra rare, and legendary. And so now we've started shipping those out, and you might get like just a bunch of commons, or you might get a legendary. We ordered like 10,000 of these things, and there's only like 100 legendaries in the whole box, but I know someone already got one in the mail. So that's become like our thing, I guess, bottle caps.
Why bottle caps?
Because we're always sitting around drinking beer now. When we played as kids, we'd just have soda and a grinder, as we say back in Massachusetts. But now we're all just sitting around drinking beer. So it'd be like, all right, that was a really good role playing. Let me give you, here, take this bottle cap. You can turn it in and, yeah. And now the knock on me is that I never give them out, but I actually think I give them out way too much. Now watch your chat explode.
We have another question from Yokai Yojimbo. He asks, why is azzmatazz the best character, and when can we expect an entire party of GM-controlled characters?
Well, without spoiling azzmatazz for people who haven't caught up, he was just one of these creations that came out of a totally random moment on the show. And that's been one of my favorite things about this, when stuff just happens randomly and I create something on the fly and then it becomes this huge ongoing joke for the show. So Razzmatazz is one of those ones that came out in a more recent episode recently, but I don't want to spoil it for anybody. Just keep listening and hopefully you'll enjoy Razzmatazz as well.
Well, that's a good point. A lot of our listeners are probably going to be tuning in for the first time. Since you've been the announcement, you've got a lot of people tuning in for the first time. If you're getting into your show, and you've already answered this question for us, but for our audience, where should they start? How should they get engaged?
I mean, the egotist in me says you start at episode 1, and like the person who just really wants you to follow along the story still says start at episode 1. I mean, when I look on the subreddit for our show, some people will ask that question, and there are people who are like, it takes them a couple episodes to get in, and then other people just vehemently defending us like, what are you talking about? It's great for episode 1. I think for the story's sake, you need to start at episode 1 because that's where you get introduced to these 4 main characters in the most mundane of circumstances. And so when you see them there and then can listen to them at episode 40 or 50 or 60 and think back on the whole journey they've gone on, to me that's what makes the show so popular, is because you develop relationships with these characters. So I know a lot of people just start listening at whatever episode we just released, and then they're like, I listened for a couple weeks, I really like the show, I think I'll go back to the beginning, and they're always glad that they did. So I would suggest starting at episode 1. If you think it's a little slow at first, don't worry, it will pick up. But other people will say no, it's great right off the bat. I don't know, I just tend to think for the story's sake you got to start at the top.
Yeah. When we were planning this episode, we traded episode recommendations. You told us to listen to the first 4. We gave you 2 of ours. I started last night. I'm on episode 13. I'm gonna.
Did you really?
Yeah, I'm gonna probably kick it back on as soon as we're done here. So yeah, I'm a fan. I like what you're doing. So I definitely do. I definitely do back you up on saying start with episode 1.
Yeah, and you blow through the episodes. Like, what's nice is if you're really into it, you will be very upset on the day when you catch up because you don't have all those back episodes to burn through. If you've got a desk job, or we have a lot of guys like, I'm a truck driver and I drive 10-hour shifts overnight, and your show has kept me awake for the past month, just being able to make these drives fly by as I'm listening to episode after episode. So, yeah, if you've got the time, start at 1.
Now,
yeah, I'm trying to find the time, but you've been so you did say that episode 1 was rough, episode 2 was great. Episode 1 was more than fine. It was great. It was really entertaining. It made me look forward to episode 2. And now you're talking about how great you've become lately. And I'm like, these first 5 episodes that I've listened to are amazing. Like, I don't know how much better you can get, but definitely don't even put that caveat that it's a little rough back then, because it's not. It's not flawless, but glad. It's fun.
Yeah, we were finding our feet. Those are those pilot episodes. But I mean, there's an NPC that's introduced on the fly randomly in episode 1 who becomes one of the most popular characters on the show. So yeah, but I mean, I can't wait I want to stay in contact with you guys because I can't wait till you get to episode X, Y, and Z so I can hear your reaction to certain things that go down. We try, now that we've become so popular, we really want to try and stretch the boundaries of what we're doing and do stuff that we've never done before. And so once you start cresting into book 2 and book 3, you'll see us experimenting with that.
Now, I have a question about how you guys do the recordings. I've seen. Maybe I have 2 questions on this, or 2. I have 2 predictions, but I want to know: do you guys record episodes back to back to back to back and then split them up, or do you actually meet once a week to record an hour?
For the most part, we try to record them all as one-offs. Sometimes for time constraints, if people are traveling, or if during the holidays. Last year we went to Skid has a house in Cape Cod, and we knew that things were going to be a little dicey over the holidays, so we went there and recorded multiple episodes, and it helped sort of bridge the gap over the holidays. But for the most part, it's just important to try and record one at a time, because I try to leave every episode with a cliffhanger, and I want the players to be like, as much as the fans. And if we just started recording another episode right away, it would kind of take away from that. And it also helps us mitigate the fact that we have lives outside of the show, to just all right, guys, we got to get together for 2.5 hours to record an hour show because it takes us, an hour to set up, a half an hour to take down, time to whatnot. And it ends up taking us probably 2.5 to 3 hours just to record one episode. So, when we play a non-recorded game, we can sit there for 5 hours, 4 hours, and play a nice long session and make progress. Our progress is a little bit slowed by the fact that we only do an hour and a half a week, but at least that means the show will last another 200 episodes probably.
If you just have a dedicated room to recording, you skip setup and takedown, and you could double the amount of time you could record.
Well, this is our next big purchase. Now that our Patreon has got up there, we're going to try and get a dedicated recording space so we can just walk in, bang out an ep, and leave. As it is now, we record mostly in my apartment now that Joe has a baby, and I don't want these guys in my apartment anymore. So we've got to get a recording space.
Going back to some questions that we've skipped
Sure.
over. Chestnut King 3. Troy, if you had to drop into the current story as a PC, what race and class would your character be?
If I dropped in right now, I would be... that's a good question. I think I would be... Well, probably right now I'd be a cleric because that's what they desperately need. But I think I would be maybe a sorcerer. And I am dying to play a Gripply. I want to be a Gripply. I like the really uncommon races. Gripply probably doesn't make a good sorcerer, but like balancing everything mechanically doesn't interest me. I'm more interested in I want to be a Gripply and I want to be a sorcerer. I don't care if the, racial bonuses work out in the sorcerer's favor. I want to just make it work for me. So yeah, Gripply sorcerer.
According to chat, you're wrong. Dronia thinks you should be a cleric.
Your opinion is wrong.
Tenlon Gnome says you'd be a paladin and you would tell everyone what to do.
That's true. That does sound like me.
And Fundamentally Doomed thinks you'd be a human fighter.
Oh boy, my least favorite class in all of Pathfinder.
Why? I love the fighter.
It's just, I don't know. I played it for GCP Live because they all voted for me to play it since it's my least favorite class. But I think it's just like the most vanilla of vanilla. Everybody wants to be humans just so they get that bonus feed at first level. And then fighter. Now I've realized the joy of customizing a fighter. You really can, make it whatever you want it to be. But I don't know. I play the fantasy games to get as far away from reality as possible, so that's why I want to be a Gripply sorcerer.
So you're missing the joy of playing a vanilla character or vanilla class, because then you could be as crazy a character as you want and not have to worry about explaining what class you are.
This is true. They wouldn't be like, oh, what do you do? Oh, he has a sword and a shield. He must be a fighter. Got it.
Or a Ripsaw Glaive.
Oh, yes.
A Pathfinder chainsaw.
Glaive is the way to go.
Okay. Yokai Yojimbo asked a non-spoiler question: have you ever considered doing one-shots in other systems?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, there's just so much to do in Pathfinder and so little time in which to do it all. I don't think I could ever get tired of just Pathfinder. I've tried other systems, Starfinder, obviously, I definitely want to play that, but especially now that we're friends with Paizo and we've got access to their entire library. I mean, I have enough games to... Joe was saying the other day, we have enough games to play for the rest of our life.
Can we go into a little bit about the arrangement you have with Paizo? What does it mean to be a Paizo podcast?
Basically, from the start, we were using their intellectual property. And so we wanted to make sure, as we were getting popular, we're like, oh, we can turn this in a way to be profitable and make this into more than just a very, very time-consuming hobby that we're now glued into having to do, because if we ever stopped, it would make too many people sad. So, before we could ever even think about monetizing the podcast in any way, we wanted to make sure everything was okay with Paizo. Otherwise, we would have to either not monetize it or just stop the show and do a homebrew. And I really just love the Pathfinder system and this adventure path so much that wasn't even an option for me. So we were lucky enough, as we were gaining popularity, to have Paizo take notice of us, and that led us to talking to some of the higher ups there. And it took a long time. Probably took about 8 months or so from the time we like sat down with Eric Mona at Comic-Con here in New York and talked about it, and he started listening to the show and going through all the different channels to make sure that we, crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, so that we could monetize this show and make sure everything was cool with them as well. And they realized in us, like, these guys are great ambassadors for the show. Not only are they playing the system at a, what we think is a higher level than most other people, even though we make mistakes constantly, they are plugging our products all the time, and we're not doing it as shills for the company. It's not like they're giving us any money whatsoever for doing it. It's just that we love Pathfinder, and we want other people to have that joy as well. And that was what we were doing. I think I started mentioning that in like an intro to episode 6 or 7. I'm like, if you guys want to have the most fun in your lives, you need to play Pathfinder. And so since we were doing that anyway, it just seemed like a natural thing for us to join together. And really what that means is we get access to all of their library, every single Adventure Path book, everything, which is awesome. I need to buy like extra hard drives just to download all this amazing content before they close the deal down. I'll be like, too late. I already have all the material. And it allows us to make money off of their intellectual property while also preserving our intellectual property that we create for the show, whether it be an NPC, a bad guy, our characters, the artwork that we commission for the show. It just allows everybody to protect each other and work to keep spreading the Pathfinder love throughout the world.
Aw.
Yeah. We have a lot of international fans, too, which is amazing.
Now, as a completely biased Pathfinder podcast, we wholly support you sticking with the Pathfinder system.
Down with 5e!
Well, no, we
no.
don't need to.
We have a rule. We have a rule on the show. Anytime we say anything bad about 5e, we have to say something, or about Dungeons and Dragons, we have to say something good about it. So their painted art style is really cool.
I mean, for me, people are always like, guys shouldn't make fun of 5e. We have a lot of fun with it. I mean, at the end of the day, we just want people gaming. I just don't want people to be afraid of Pathfinder. So the sort of character I play is the one that always, says 5e stinks. But I mean, as long as you're playing games, it's great. But don't be afraid of Pathfinder because it's too rules heavy or whatever. It's just nothing could be farther from the truth. The rules are there to give you structure, but you can learn the game at your own pace and, use the rules you want, not use the rules you want, and kind of make a system for yourself. But to me, you just can't beat the Pathfinder system. That's my 2 cents. Nothing against you.
I agree with that. What you're seeing from us is the scars of people who survived the Edition Wars.
Ah, yes. I have only heard tales of these battles.
Yeah, 5e came out and we were all just pleasant with each other, but that was not the case when 4e came out.
No. Yeah. I mean, we had to pull switchblades back then.
What a terrible...
Because we didn't have smartphones at the time, so the only way we could communicate was with knives.
I'm still amazed when we get emails like, "Yeah, I have a 4e game going right now." I'm like, "Really? Do you not have the internet?"
If there's any group of players I feel the most bad for, it's the 4e players, the 4e fans and loyalists, because I'm going on a tangent, but because they did such a hard switch into 4e, like everything changed, and then things went badly financially, and then they had to do a big hard switch away from 4e. It's like there's this abandoned children that went on the ride and now just have no home.
Those poor lost souls.
All right, well, I have so many things to say, Param. Why did you go down on that tangent?
No.
Troy, it is 9:30. We asked you for an hour. You promised us an hour. Can we continue a little bit to at least wrap things up?
Please,
or is
absolutely.
This it? Cliffhanger?
Yeah. No, I'm here for you guys and for everybody else. Now I'm catching my stride. I'm not tripping over my words as much.
Excellent. Then let's talk about how you're here for people. Glass Cannon is organizing get-togethers across countries. Like, yes. I got contacted about helping to organize one in Montreal, which is not your country. So that's officially Glass Cannon's gone international. Yes. What's going on there? What's the motivation there?
Well, a Discord channel, after the subreddit started, a Discord channel sort of happened spontaneously as well, run by listeners of the show for people who are fans of the GCP to start playing games with each other. And so they're finding partners to play either on Roll20 or to play in person. And that just, as we've grown, has naturally turned into like, oh, wait, you live a block from me? You live in the same city? You're a couple hours away? Why don't we just meet together? So after doing GCP Live and meeting these people face to face, and then I went to PaizoCon this year and was able to meet like 40 fans that just live in the Portland, Seattle area. There just became this outpouring of like, we want to run, an event in our hometown of just GCP fans and like do it as a fan club. And so Joe and I specifically were like, well, why don't we just like help organize this? We'll send them a bunch of stuff. We'll sign some dice, sign some books, and like record little special intros for them with our theme music and everything, and make it into a thing. And so now there are these events happening. There's 3 happening this weekend. One in Greensboro, North Carolina, one in Portland, Oregon, and one in Saugus, Massachusetts. I think there's over 100 people right now between all 3 events going. And there's people that are playing Pathfinder for the first time. There's people that have been playing for a few years, grognards, you name it. And so everyone is being grouped into their own little thing, and they'll play Pathfinder all day, and then they'll go out having a few beers at the end of the night. So we're doing our best to try and unify those events under our brand. And so this month there's 5 events happening, and then I think in another few months we'll try and get the Montreal one going. And now we're getting requests all over, like, I want to do one in Austin, I want to do one in Kalamazoo. And so hopefully we can keep doing these, and then eventually build and do an actual con, like a 4-day con, and run PAX out of business.
That's ambitious.
Yeah, no, that's never going to happen. But I would love to do Glass Cannon Con. That would be amazing. And so setting up these little things is really like just laying the foundation for an eventual con where we can do it like the pros do.
How come it's not Glass Cannon?
We thought about that. Or Glass Can Con.
Yeah.
Skid said we should have Glass Can Con in Cancun.
Oh.
So the Glass Cancun Con Cannon. Yeah, there's a lot of options, and they're all foolish. But hopefully there'll be more live events, like we did the GCP Live in April here in New York, and it was a huge success. We sold out in like 20 minutes, so now we want to do more of those live events and hopefully be able to travel. Like next year we'd like to do one in LA, like try to hit the major cities, do one in Chicago, New York, LA, Boston, and then, if we could ever like tour, that would be wonderful. But we're going to be doing a live show at Gen Con, actually, and Matthew isn't going to be able to come with us, so we replaced him that day with a very, very special person that we're not announcing, but there are still like 15 tickets left out of 90. So if you're coming to Gen Con, make sure you come to our live event. I think it's the first night, Thursday night, 6:00. It's gonna be pretty fun.
6:00, so just as the dealer room's closing?
I think so, yeah.
What are you doing to me?
I'm sorry. Just run over there, and we'll start with the Q&A and then go into the live show.
Sorry, strange question about Amish country. We'll get to it after I've had a chance to read it.
Be in Amish country?
We'll get to that. That's your cliffhanger. You get to find out what I'm talking about in a few minutes. So I like that approach. I like the idea of building an audience in this way, but this isn't something that I've seen other gaming groups or like celebrity gamers do. Is this you as a comedian and as an entertainer? Is that drawing from that field?
I think so. I think it was happening without me actually intuiting that this is what I'm doing. But are you guys familiar with Dane Cook?
Yes.
Whether you enjoy Dane Cook as a comedian or not, you're not. A lot of people don't like him. I mean, I've always been a fan. I try to support all comedians because, as one myself, I don't want anybody talking bad about me. But the reason he skyrocketed to fame, among the, there were a lot of reasons, obviously, whether you like him or not, he was skyrocketing, is that he would go out every single time after the show and take pictures with every single person there, sign all the autographs, say, here's go to like my MySpace page right now. This is back in MySpace days, before Twitter, before Facebook and everything. And he built an audience with that personal connection. And there are other comedians like Eliza Schlesinger and I'm trying to think of other ones that like have used that same model and become huge in their followings because of that. That human connection is so important. And when we're doing this podcast for, probably at this point, 10,000 or so people, we try to answer every single email. Skid is answering emails left and right. Joe and I try to jump on there as well. We try to, tweet back at people. When we have these events, we're accessible. They're not like, all right, calm down. Let me sign your autographs. Let me take your pictures. We try to really be connect with these people, because that's another reason that's going to make us different than the celebrity shows. I mean, I don't know, maybe the other ones do that, but like, we want to build a personal connection with these people, because that to me is what the heart of RPG gaming is. Like, that is why these still exist and video games haven't just taken over, because people are always going to want to get into a room with each other and laugh and roll dice. And so if we can foster that same attitude with our, I don't even like to call them fans, I like to call them listeners, with our listeners, foster that same attitude with the listeners, that this is a communal process and we're all sitting at one large table. I know that sounds really hippie, but like, that's the way I'm looking at it. It's like, we're all sitting at the same table, we're all learning from each other, and we're all forging friendships because of this amazing, fun hobby that we have. So I don't know, it just sort of inorganically happened, and luckily we all have the time to be able to devote to creating and fostering these relationships.
Now, that is very much the opposite of what I was expecting you to say, that this was inorganic and that you're just kind of going with the flow on it. It really felt like, I don't know, just looking at it from an outsider, I was like, oh, that had to be part of like a big plan. He would get the Paizo official status, he would start building this audience. No, that's just you being you. Yeah,
that's the way we are. Yeah, I just don't think you can strategically plan out something that has to come from the heart. You know what I mean? It's not going to work. You're not going to get very far, especially in an industry like this where there's just very few people that are doing well, trying to come up with some strategic solution to connecting with your audience. You have to just be as real as possible.
I didn't mean to insult you by saying I was expecting the opposite.
Well, I wasn't insulted.
All right. Speaking of connecting with that audience, we've got a few more questions.
Sure.
Mazel Steed, what are the storytelling lessons you learned from the very first episode to now?
That's a good question. I mean, I didn't start doing the cliffhangers until probably episode 7 or 8, but that's become a huge thing. It's like, we'll see you next week. We had every episode that way now, and that to me is very important. You want to be able to end every episode with everyone just like, I can't wait to find out what happens next week. And that goes back to like the beginnings of television. It's just like, we'll see you next week. But in terms of overall storytelling, it's very different from a normal game, in that, like, in a normal game, you want to make sure every session you're giving every player their chance in the sun, their moment in the sun, because you want them to feel engaged with the game itself. I don't really care about my players' emotions so much. I want what's best for the audience. And so I have to kind of mitigate my idea of what I think is the best story with what the players are giving me and trying to do with their own stories as well. And it's a bit of a dance in that way. So I don't know. I would love to sit down and write a new screenplay and see if my storytelling abilities have gotten any better since the last time I wrote something. I think it's just really I'm fortunate in that I have amazing players that are amazing storytellers in their own right, and all I've got to do is just classic listen and respond. And then it helps me that Paizo writes unbelievable adventure paths that make half my work incredibly easy.
So I think one of the advantages of the cliffhanger is that, like, most of my sessions start with the GM being like, does anyone remember what we were doing? And everyone just kind of spends 10 minutes picking up all the details we remember and making sure we're all on the same page. But I feel like if you end right before combat or right before something memorable, then people are going to show up like, of course we remember what was going to happen. I've been holding my dice in my hand ready to roll it this whole week.
Oh yeah, I mean, we talk about this on Cannon Fodder. Like, even if you're not recording, GM should do that in all their games, because so many gaming groups die because of lack of interest, or they don't feel like they're invested in the story, or like, I had a kid and now I don't want to make time for this anymore. And so as a GM, you should do your best to try and end every session with like a moment like that, because now everyone's just like, all right, when can we play again? Can we get a schedule going to get this happen? So that sort of thing that happened on the show is something that all GMs should be using to make sure their games don't die out.
And how do you manage these, like the logistics of a cliffhanger? How much are you watching the clock?
So I'll have like a stopwatch near me once we start recording. You know, it's funny, I've never actually answered this question, but I'll have a stopwatch that I'm keeping an eye on. But I honestly probably 80% of the time don't know how the episode's going to end, because you just can't determine, especially in this particular part of the story where they're in a complete sandbox. I never know if they're going to go left, right, up, or down. So I've got to kind of prepare everything. So around the time when, if there's 10, 15 minutes or so left in the episode, that's when my wheels start churning. Like, where can I cliffhang this? Where can I cliffhang this? And so at that point, I'm waiting for it and just trying to be like, right there, there it is. If it's like we try not to end mid-combat too much, but like you find it. I don't know. It's become a thing that I've gotten good at, but I can't teach it, guys. I just can't teach it.
All right, we've got like some rapid fire questions here.
Sure.
So first of all, that strange one about Amish country.
Yes.
It was Robisonia was saying that you'd said something like ish country and he didn't know what it was. Did you say Amish country? I'm guessing no.
I didn't.
Do you remember what ish country it was? Because I don't remember you saying that.
Ish country. Call me Ishmael. No, I don't know what I was saying. But I love the Amish. My wife is from Hershey, Pennsylvania, so we drive through Lancaster all the time. And no, I didn't say Amish.
Do you drive through Lancaster all the time? I drive through Lancaster all the time.
Get out of here.
But I'm going south.
Oh,
I'm going to my parents' trailer in that area.
New York to Hershey, PA.
All right. 10 Lawn Gnomes question. What's the best way to keep a story moving forward when the entire party bombs the knowledge check?
Oh, yeah. We answered this in a recent Canon fodder. It's like, what do you do when there's information you need to get out to the PCs and they either don't have the knowledge skill or they just, bomb it, as he said, or she. One thing you can do is like just have the information come out in another way. Have them be in an inn, and then a random NPC like seems interesting, and you talk to them and like, well, did you ever hear the legend about blah blah blah? Get the information out that way, or just move the information to a different room and be like, oh, you find a journal, roll a knowledge history, and then give them the information. There's always ways you can place that. Just think of it as like, if they didn't find a very important sword that they need to move on the story, you can just move that sword to a chest in another room. You can do the same thing with information.
So I'm also going to suggest that every knowledge check treat it as a save versus sass, and that the worse they get it, the sassier the NPC that has to explain it to them has to be.
I like that. Save versus sass.
Yeah.
What's the DC of that sass save?
This is why I always let some of my players hang on to a couple of their skill points so they can have knowledge, plot, convenience.
Oh, that's good. That's smart. Profession, plot, convenience.
All right, what video game... Oh, sorry, this is from Chestnut King 3. What video game coming out in the future are you most excited to Twitch?
Probably Red Dead Revolution. I think that's what it's called, Red Dead Revolution.
Isn't that an old game?
Wait, isn't that what the new one is? Red Dead Revolver?
Red Dead
Redemption.
No,
sorry, you're right.
Redemption, thank you, yeah.
Yes,
I was in Revolution. I had a very small voice part in Red Dead Revolution. And so I that was the first PS3 game that I bought. I bought the PS3 and that and played it, loved it. And so I think out of all the games that are coming out, it stinks that one got bumped to first or second quarter of next year. It's supposed to come out in the fall. But I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about this Kingmaker CRPG, especially now that it's going to be available for Mac users like myself.
Is that something you would Twitch?
Oh, totally, yeah. I kind of want to get a Twitch going where Joe, Skid, and I all play Destiny on the PS4, but we run our own Twitch channels and play like teams doing those, when Destiny 2 comes out. I got to talk to them about that, see if they're interested. We'll run like concurrent Twitch streams on our own Twitch channels and then randomly host them on the Glass Cannon Twitch and then, do those missions that are almost impossible, and then just have fans come in and play the fourth member of the team. I think that'd be fun.
And Moselstead says, have you ever prepared a story plot point and your players take it in a different direction? What do you do?
All the time. Best laid plans, they always fall apart.
That's the expression.
Well, that's the old extent. That's the way it goes. That's the best thing you can do as a GM is like plan, like hold on tightly, let go lightly. Like, because you have to be ready for them to do what you didn't plan for them to do. So you don't want to be that GM that has something that's like, it's got to come out, even if it's going to go contrary to everything they did, just because you think it's the right idea and way better for the story. You got to throw it away. Maybe you can bring it in another way, but you got to go with the PCs, because the last thing a PC wants to feel is like, or the player rather, is that they don't have agency in what's going on. They don't want to feel railroaded. And so the best thing you could do is just let it go.
I liked that your hold on tightly gradually became a punch, that you don't want to just be punching your players with your plot.
Right. Yeah,
I think people are losing out not having a visual element to Glass Cannon podcast.
I know. We've thought about it, but I can't trust us live.
We have a question. Oh gosh, I missed it. Okay. It was somebody asked, can they see the neon D20? What are they talking about?
So one of the most popular characters on the show is my D20, and it pretty much only rolls 20s. It's not weighted, as far as I know. I haven't tested it, but it's become sort of this icon of the show, and it's neon green. I'll get it. Hold on.
Now, while he's gone, we'll probably be wrapping up soon. If you've got any last questions for Troy, now is the time to get them in.
So I guess
you can look, but you can't touch. There he is, right there.
Ooh.
So take
it is neon and green.
Rolled a 7. It's broken. It's trash. Yeah, that's neon green. There was a recent episode where one of the players, they have not admitted it, but they stole it, and luckily I was able to get it back. They blamed my cats, my poor defenseless cats, but I know they're the ones that took it.
Right, and now that you've got it back and it's not rolling 20s, are you sure it's the same one?
I mean, obviously someone touched it to be cursed with their bad luck.
There are ways that you can easily load a 20 using household objects, I'm just saying.
Shave it down.
Microwave it just slightly in like boiling water or something. I don't know. I've heard about these things. I've never tried them myself.
We've got a question from Todd Dunn Out. He wants to know who your favorite NPC character voice is.
I'm really liking azzmatazz, but I think there's one, Howie the Green Sting Scorpion. He was familiar for the Witch, Gormley, and when he finally makes his voice heard, I can't remember what episode it was, I just went into like a Boston Southie accent, and that became very popular with our fans. So I would have to say Howie, the Green Sting Scorpion.
All right, we're about ready to wrap things up. So you mentioned Gen Con. Where else can people find you in the near future? Both gaming and comedy related.
Gaming and comedy related. Well, hopefully soon I'll have some comedy dates up for people that are in New York. I'd like to do a show out here if you can come out and see it. But we'll definitely be at Gen Con. We're going to be there the whole weekend. I think we get in Wednesday and we're not leaving until Monday. We have that event Thursday night where we're going to be playing a live game with a very special guest and doing a Q&A. And then after that, we're going to a bar called the Slippery Noodle where we're just going to hang out with the fans and get to put faces with names until they kick us out or someone gets arrested. And then Friday morning, we're going to be running a bunch of Pathfinder Society scenarios for fans that have already bought tickets. I think there's 24 people that did that. And then the rest of the weekend, we're just going to be out hanging, gaming, and playing with everybody. We'll also be at PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia in November, which we're really excited about. I've been to PAX East twice, and it is just the best. I can't imagine an entire PAX with just tabletop. I'm going to need more than 4 days to enjoy that one fully. And then just stay tuned. We're hoping, now that the Patreon has taken off, we're going to be able to do more and maybe even tour at some point. But we're very accessible. We've tried to make ourselves accessible since day one. We may not be able to answer our emails as quickly as we used to, but we are available. And the most important people, not only when they're listening, but in general, is the audience. So don't be afraid to reach out and say hello.
All right, Janix Quinn really wants me to ask if I can hold the baby.
You're gonna have to catch up to get that reference. But,
all right,
that's a classic Razzmatazz line. Classic
and
Razzmatazz.
Angire wants you to plug the subreddit.
Oh, and the subreddit. I mean, the people that are running the subreddit, the mods on the subreddit, they started a community that is really branched out into all this other stuff that we have going on. They do such a great job of doing every episode discussion, cannon fodder discussion. Like cannon fodder will come on at midnight tonight. There'll be 20 comments when I wake up tomorrow morning. I can read about like, oh, I didn't like that they said this. But then there's other people that are talking like, hey, any GC people in Colorado? Oh yeah, I'm from Colorado. I'm Colorado, and then they start games on there, or just talking about rules stuff in general. So the subreddit and the Discord are two great tools, and we're going to have some new stuff coming up very, very soon that I can't announce, but right around Gen Con time there's going to be more stuff that has to do with us connecting the community together and us taking a more integral role in that.
All right, let us know and we will try and plug it when we can.
For sure.
And we're not going to have a glass cannon segment. Like, don't go overboard.
Well, just keep it in mind. Keep it in
All
mind.
right, we'll keep it in mind. You keep us in mind. And
yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was
thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
I love that you guys are spreading so much Pathfinder love, and your fan base has been great to us all week, and excitement for this. So hopefully we can all join together and take over the world.
Oh, is that the end goal?
Wait, I meant just take over the gaming world.
You played Kingmaker, right, Ryan?
I have twice and stopped at about the same part both
See,
times.
that's why you didn't know the plan. You had only reveals itself in book 6.
First we build a kingdom, then we destroy it.
Excellent. All right, thank you very much, Troy. We will see you online, and I'll try and find you at Gen Con.
Please do.
Thank you, thank you. And before I break, any of you, I'm seeing a whole lot of Glass Cannon and fans in our chat that say this is the first time they're hearing us. Like, follow, subscribe, nodirectionpodcast.com. We'll do this again in the shout-outs. We post, we do this every 2 weeks, and we have a lot of great content. And we'll be right back right after this. And we're back. The video's going to fix itself in a second.
In the Pathfinder news segment, we talk about the latest happenings for the Pathfinder role-playing game, the Starfinder role-playing game, anything else from Paizo, anything else from other third-party companies, basically anything that we think will interest you or that you need to know as a Pathfinder fan, we try to get you that information. And the biggest news for the last month or so has been the Kickstarter for Pathfinder Kingmaker, the CRPG from Owlcat Games. Well, it just concluded last night. Param, how did it do?
It broke over $900,000 funded within the launch period. And that meant they hit a lot of their stretch goals. We have a camping system. We have an extra chapter. We've got the Magus. We've got archetypes for all the classes, except for the classes that don't really work well with archetypes, and our Pathfinder players know which ones those are. We have a Goblin PC joining the crew. Am I missing something? I know I must have missed one.
The Goblin NPC was the last big one.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the new chapter?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe I did get them all. Excellent.
I think you did, yeah.
Again, this was not a Kickstarter to fund the development of the game. This was just to add extras to it, and I imagine also other expenditures involved in launching and promoting a game. And it showed. It really showed because they did so many demonstrations of the product over the course of this Kickstarter. They had a lot of videos where you could actually see it being played. You could see the art. I was actually really impressed with the character art. I was really impressed with that. They've got the Paizo style down really well with the product. And that has gone a long way to relieve a lot of the hesitations that I know some of our listeners had, because they say so on their Facebook page. And even I had, because of some previous Kickstarters. And so to see that the game exists, is playable, looks really polished, even though it's still in like not even alpha yet. I guess it's technically alpha. I'm not really sure those designations in this particular point in the juncture. To be able to see that this is a thing that actually exists, not a thing that will exist eventually.
I think that this is a game that has a lot of replay value just based on how they've described it. Because like when the archetypes became a thing, became a thing that we could be funding towards, I was like, how likely am I to not only need more than just the 12 classes or so that they've already announced, but also need archetypes to really customize them further? But thinking about it, I mean, there's going to be a lot of alignment-based decisions. There's going to be the kingdom building itself, so you can make different buildings. I feel like I'm going to be playing this game 3 or 4 times. And so having the archetypes, I think I'll really appreciate, by at least my 3rd playthrough.
Well,
when I play yet another fighter.
It's following the path of the BioWare RPG and back in the whole Baldur's Gate era specifically. But one of the things that was always popular about the BioWare RPGs that started with those early CRPGs with Baldur's Gate and the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and continues with the company all the way up until the very last Mass Effect game they just released is that the story has a lot of branches and choices, and your alignment and your morality matters and determines like what segments you see, what people think about you. The story goes drastically differently in BioWare RPGs, and they have been unabashed saying that they want to emulate that style. So multiple playthroughs is almost a given, and so it helps that you've got a lot of options.
Yeah. I'm happy this funded. We can expect delivery according to their estimated schedule, August 2018. It's going to be a long year waiting for this, Param.
Yep. And that's a realistic delivery date based on what we've seen. Usually these Kickstarters have not so realistic delivery dates, and then you get the real delivery date about the time that you hit the estimated delivery date. So yeah, totally awesome. And that was great.
And if the updates for the Kickstarter have, if they're any indication, I think we'll be getting regular information from Owlcat Games about how development is coming. And so, yeah, even though it's a year off, actually more than a year, I have a feeling that they'll be constantly reminding us of what's coming and why we should be excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and expect us to, if anything new big comes from this, you'll hear about it on the show during the news segments.
Param, I was actually saving this next bit, unless did you have a news item that you would like to talk about?
No.
So I'd originally put this in the shout-outs, but I think I'll actually make it a news item, and that is Thistleguard.
I saw this. Yes, this is really interesting. So who's putting this out?
WizKids.
Whoa! I did not think it was WizKids, though it looks exactly like WizKids stuff, so I should have thought it was WizKids.
Do you want to summarize what Thistleguard is?
Okay, Thistleguard is a set of miniature lines portraying adventurers that are kids, which means that if you're looking for a kid to give to, I guess the primary audience is younger players. We've talked a bit about how important it is that you get to identify with the characters that are represented in your game, and we talked about that a lot in terms of diversity. And then, of course, one of the reasons Yoon exists as a character is that young players play this game too, and they need to be able to identify with it. So they have a bunch of young adventurer miniatures, which are children adventurers, and they're coming with these really cool and also cute pets that it looks like they're paired up with them. It looks like it's going to be a pre-painted mini line, much like the Pathfinder pre-packs sets, if you remember those, like the iconic hero sets that came out for Pathfinder, and it looks about that quality too.
So there's some interesting things in the write-up, because Thistleguard is not a game, but there is the backstory that it takes place in a fantasy world where children are the main heroes. They gain abilities at a young age that they lose as they grow into adulthood. So
that's a convenient way to explain it. It's a lot like the anime. Well, there's something with the teenage nervous system makes them the only ones that can pilot giant robots.
So yeah, WizKids they've got the I forget the name of it. No, I'm not. It's not going to come to me. But they've got the unpainted plastic miniatures that are both D&D and Pathfinder, and they come with clear plastic elements. Yeah, WizKids has really upped their game, and they're making a very aggressive move into the miniatures market. I mean, they've always been there. They've been there since Pathfinder Battles came out, but
we used to make fun of WizKids quality. I mean, there are some X-Men miniatures they've made that are basically just blobs of wax with blue and yellow painted on them. And it's a long difference coming from that rubber monstrosity to these ultra-detailed, pre-primed with Vallejo primer minis that are being packaged now.
Well, and do you remember Fea, the iconic witch? The first one was so bad that Paizo basically made an official statement that they were trying to find a way to get a new one into people's hands for free. It was just they apologized for it. She was just such a blob of paint.
Mm-hmm. And minis painting is tough, and especially if you're painting them by the thousands. But yeah, I mean, the quality needs to be there.
All right, well, Param, that's all I've got for the news, although I feel like I'm missing something. Anything you can remember that I should have?
The previews for Starfinder Society's factions hit today. I do not know what that preview was because it hit when I was prepping for this episode, so go check that out. I'm sorry, gang. That hit while I was prepping. But that's the only news. We're getting slow leaks from Starfinder. A lot of the character backgrounds are happening. They're gearing up for that, which kind of leads into Gen Con news. Gen Con has sold out of 4-day passes. They still have a limited number of 1-day passes, but we just got another email. Because we are media and we're officially registered with Gen Con, we get a lot of these press releases from them when the big things happen. They're also almost sold out of Saturday tickets. And it looks like everything else is quickly selling out as well. This is going to be a very crowded Gen Con.
Mm. Yeah, Gen Con in general is pretty crowded, and it takes over Indianapolis. And this year, flights have been a lot more expensive. Hotels are more expensive. You have to go further and further away to get reasonable prices. So if you have your Gen Con tickets and you haven't booked yet, you might need to start looking at that now and looking at contingency plans. I will tell you that we are flying into Cincinnati and driving for 2 hours just because it was that much more reasonably priced.
Oh my goodness. I did not know that. Wait, you're driving in through Cincinnati? We need to talk.
Yes.
We need to talk.
Oh,
I passed through Cincinnati on the way.
Okay, then we will talk.
We will talk.
On the air right now. Tell me your travel plan.
No, we can't. No. I've got people.
People want to know.
I have a caravan I have to negotiate this with. But yeah, it's nuts. And this means that the badges were already really expensive. What were they? $85 this year. If you didn't pre-purchase, and $80 or $75 if you did. But the 1-day badges are like $45 a piece. So if you're going to attend all 4 days now, you've got to buy 4 $45 badges. You're talking $180 worth of badges right there. As opposed, you double just for the badges. Finding a hotel room right now is impossible. You're going to be 20 miles out if you're lucky. Everything in the block is sold out. Even the worst Holiday Inn La Quintas bolt-on trailer is sold out. I mean, you can't even get a porta potty reserved right now. Much less something connected to the hotel. And it's the 50th anniversary. A lot of huge products are launching. Starfinder is launching. So there's a lot of hype there. With success of podcasts like Critical Role and Glass Cannon, who were just on the show, has made the interest in tabletop role-playing game higher than it has ever been before. Then it makes for this perfect storm of basically we're going to flatten Indianapolis.
Yeah, and Gen Con extended their contract with Indianapolis. They extended it last year. It's extended through 2021. I don't know what they're going to do for the next 5-odd years because they've reached effectively critical mass. I know it's an anniversary. It's the 50th year, so it makes sense that this one sold out. But I have a hard time picturing Gen Con 51 not doing comparably well.
I can engage in some baseless speculation if you want to. Yes. This is completely baseless speculation. It was very telling when they extended the contract for exactly 1 year to 2021. That means that Gen Con was very unhappy with some of the laws that Indianapolis had passed. They passed some very anti-LGBT legislation, and a lot of companies were protest, and Gen Con was one of those.
Had they passed them? I thought they were developing those laws, and Gen Con protesting. Anyway, I probably shouldn't get too far into it. I thought they hadn't passed the laws, is what I was going to say.
I think they walked it back, so I don't know the details of that right now, so I apologize to our listeners. But especially since this was years ago, and a lot of stuff has happened since then on that front. But Gen Con was very critical at the time, and then they announced very shortly after that time, it was after the walk back announcement, that they extended their contract for a year. But it was exactly 1 year, and they haven't extended it any further since then. That tells me that they have a place in mind they want to go to, that they can only go to with that gap filled in. So that they went exactly 1 year so they can match up the dates on when they're going to be somewhere else. And my money is on Austin.
Austin? Why?
It's centrally located. Gen Con likes to be central.
Is it?
It's in the central of the two coasts of
coastally central, because I thought it was pretty far south. I know Texas is gigantic.
It is totally south, but Indianapolis is totally north, so it's just basically heading diagonally down, very slight diagonal. And also, there are very few cities that can handle conventions that are bigger than Gen Con. If they're selling out, I believe I believe that the Civic Center has a maximum capacity, which is how they have to judge how many tickets, of 75,000. And so that's probably close to the attendance or ticket sales, because they just crested 70,000 last year, and they were getting closer and closer. So if they're getting close to the cap, and I think that's how the tickets have sold out. And there's no official word on that, but there's very few places that can support a humongous convention like that. And so it's like Las Vegas, New York, LA, and Texas is like the places in the US that can support anything bigger than what they're already doing. John Bastille says Minneapolis and St. Paul. I don't know. But it's outgrown Indianapolis. It's completely outgrown it.
All right. Do you want to address Todd One Out's comment?
I do not know. That is an ironic thing. He says Indiana anti-LGBT laws moves to Texas, which has worse, especially lately.
True. But isn't Austin the opposite of everything you think of when you think of Texas?
But Indianapolis is the opposite of Indiana too, for the same reason.
Okay.
Because the city came out very publicly against the legislation when it was going. But hey, politics aside, there's just no place big enough for that. And I have to apologize. I broke one of my own rules and called diversity topics a political topic, but it's not. But moving on, there's just very few cities big enough, and they want to stay central. So that's like, maybe St. Louis can hold them. That city's kind of past its prime, but it is big.
The city is past its prime.
Oh man, St. Louis people are going to hate me. Let's just say the city has showed its age every time I visited it lately. It's not like falling apart like some American cities are that are making the news nightly. It's just that, hey, it's an old city that shows that it is an old city, but it is big, and it has a lot of hotel support. So maybe St. Louis could hold Gen Con.
Todd One Out says because the Rams are gone, it's past its prime.
Sorry for the St. Louis hate, guys. I've had bad experiences on my visits to St. Louis.
All right, and I only know most American cities topically, so you really needed to explain your references.
Oh, I need to explain what's okay.
No, by now you have.
Okay,
every time you've made one, I've been like, "What does that mean?"
Okay, yeah. And it's also as in the middle of the country as you can get because its nickname is the Gateway to the West. So it's like the official point where the eastern United States becomes the western United States, like the Wild West.
You know what? Earlier I said that I had a hard time picturing Gen Con 51 selling out less than Gen Con 50, but I forgot that between Gen Con 50 and Gen Con 51 is PAX Unleashed 1. And it's even more centrally located if I understand American geography, and I admit that I don't. But it's going after that Central United States gaming market that Gen Con has basically dominated until now.
And it is moving into that. And PAX is huge. It's always had that as a part of it. We're yet to see if that's going to be super successful. This is the first time it's gone. Some PAXs have closed shops before. Some Gen Cons have closed shop before. And we need to see how it goes. I think that Gen Con has gone so big that it does need to have something bleeded off a bit.
All right. Well, I think the next couple of years will be interesting in that regard. If people just like watching nerd business interacting with each other, the PAX Unleashed versus Gen Con is probably going to be an interesting battle.
Yeah.
It's something that they could coexist, but I also think it's something that one will definitely start siphoning off the other, and it's all about how the other reacts. Because for all we know, Gen Con organizers would be more than happy to not have to deal with exactly all the logistic problems that come with Gen Con being as big as it is.
And Jacob Blackman also points out that PAX Unplugged is happening in Philadelphia. That's pretty far east. Yeah, that's almost as east as you can get. It is east. It is a coastal city.
Oh, really? Huh. You and your geography. What a fascinating country you live in, Param. Canada is huge, but it's basically a straight line. It's like 90% of our population is 20 miles from your border.
Oh. Well, it's a nice border. I hear you take care of it well.
Thank you. We're proud of our border.
But I do think that it needs to happen. But you act as if Gen Con hasn't competed with other humongous cons before. There's Origins Game Fair that's been Gen Con's primary competitor for a long time. It's also centrally located. It has about half the number of attendees. And then there's Dragon Con, which is
polite to call Origin the Pepsi of gaming conventions here. Like size-wise, it does not compare.
No. And then there's Dragon Con in Atlanta, which is probably the other big competition. Though that has become infamous lately for reasons that I'm not informed enough to go into. It's just that has had a history the last few years of some... Maybe I can see why some people don't want to go to Dragon Con anymore.
Yeah, I've been reading up on Dragon Con. Every couple of years, Dragon Con's in the news, and it's never positive.
Yeah, it's not great. We need but that's not saying that PAX hasn't had its social problems either. There's been several controversies surrounding that, and the Penny Arcade webcomic is a well-loved comic to the gaming industry, but it is some very crude material, stuff that we can't describe on air because we like our PG rating.
It's true, but it's not exclusively known for the bad reputation, for all the bad press it gets. And I've definitely read some stories that I thought it deserved the bad press that it got, but it also has its people that appreciate it for reasons that we appreciate good conventions, and that it's not necessarily a totally toxic atmosphere at the convention. It's just that every now and then something related to the people that run it ruffles some feathers.
And it also helps with PAX that I think they're uniquely suited to adapt to supporting a board game only convention more than other video game cons, because PAX earned its reputation as being the place where small independent developers go to get shown and get attention that they can't get at the E3, that they can't get at Tokyo Game Show or similar venues where it's just AAA billion-dollar titles just knocking them out of the market. And even the biggest, hugest company in the RPG industry is smaller than your average independent studio in the gaming industry. I mean, there's like what, 4 people right now working on Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, Paizo has like a lot more than that. They've got 4 people just working on Starfinder, not to mention the dozens others that they've got working at other parts of the company. So they're definitely bigger. But if Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition can exist in a company of 4 people assigned to it, even the biggest name in the industry doesn't even compare to all but the smallest of the indie devs in the video game industry.
Is Dungeons & Dragons really down to 4 people?
It was at the last time I checked, yes.
Wow.
And they did a lot. They lean heavily on freelancing, and they did a lot of partnerships with like Kobold Press and so on.
I do remember the partnership with Kobold Press, and I know that their releases are really down, but I guess I'm more surprised that I didn't know that I've come so far from paying attention to like staying on top of the Wizards of the Coast news. Just surprises me.
Oh, Jacob Blackman points out the story that we totally missed. Owen Casey Stevens has been promoted to the lead Starfinder developer. That means he is off the AP line. Not the AP line, the player's companion line. And he has moved on as basically the rules designer of the Starfinder system.
Yeah, Jacob Blackman calls him the lead Starfinder developer, but I believe he's the lead Starfinder designer.
And the titles in the RPG industry are backwards, so I always confuse them.
I know, but I'm trying to stay consistent with how Paizo uses them, and I'm just on Owen's Facebook page now to confirm that. But I do remember him saying he was the lead designer, which makes sense because up until then it only had developers on Starfinder, and it was this Pathfinder design team that was helping the Starfinder developers, from the stories that I've heard, that it was helping the Starfinder developers design their rules.
Owen is one of the best.
Owen posts so much stuff; it's hard to skim his Facebook page.
And Owen is one of the best rules designers in the industry. He is fantastic with balanced and interesting game design and doing it in a conservative number of words and succinctly and easy to understand. I've been a fan of we've been a fan of Owen's work on this show officially since, the very first Super Genius game products were coming out.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to say, I was going to shout out to his blog lately, and it kind of relates to this because I believe it's because he's the Starfinder design lead, which I've just finally found. Yeah, he can now say his Paizo title has changed from developer to Starfinder design lead. And so his blog has had some really amazing crunch on it. He had the Unicorn Companion a couple of days ago, and then either yesterday or today he released a Spellless Summoner.
Yeah, that was really so awesome looking.
Alternate class.
Yes.
So I have a feeling it's with him as the Starfinder's design lead. He's itching to get some Pathfinder ideas out there, but he doesn't have the time to do this for Rogue Genius, and he doesn't have, it's not his responsibility anymore. It's just speculation.
And he can't release Starfinder stuff yet.
Right. So it's our benefit, more free content from an amazing designer who happens to work for the first party that releases Pathfinder material. So yeah, if you haven't gone to Owen's blog lately or regularly, actually a couple of weeks ago he was also doing not a lot of game content stuff, but just a lot of working in the game industry essays, and those were super interesting too. So honestly, no matter what part of the game industry you are interested in, you should be subscribing to Owen's blog because it's really amazing stuff. All right, Param, we can wrap things up, or I've proposed a banter segment here in the outline.
I have not seen. Sorry, I did not see the outline.
All right.
What is the banter segment? Oh wait, if you tell us,
this came up in chat, or in our No Direction Network chat. The defense of the GMPC.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's sort of one of the things that I champion a lot. Oh boy, yeah, we can do this. Let's have this chat. I'm in a minority opinion on this one. I know.
Now you go by the name Param, but your name is Jefferson J. Param is the name of the character you're best known for, but that was the character that you GMPC'd, correct?
Yes. It was in a very small group of 3 turned 2. It's my longest. It's my longest running group I play with my little brother, and occasionally that expands a little bit, but most of the time it stays small. And so, first, I grew up an army brat. I don't know if you know what that means, an army brat. It means I grew up on military bases, moving every freaking month. So the people that you learn to play with and get along with are your siblings. And role-playing games are awesome, and they're especially awesome when you can geek out about it with somebody else constantly. So duo games are something I've done since time immemorial, since I've been doing this. And part of the challenge of duo games is these games are designed, especially for running any sort of pre-published material, for parties of 4 or more. I think 4 is the core assumption now, as the minimum. So you have to introduce companion PCs. You have to let the other players control more than one PCs. And I do this for any small groups I'm running, because you got to fill out at least to that 4-player slot just to make sure that you don't have to do so much work on your end reinterpreting what the CR means, what the treasure balance is supposed to be. Am I going to wipe them out just because a troll shows up and they don't have a cleric? So I've been running GM PCs since basically, I've been playing, and I've learned all the lessons, the good lessons, the bad lessons. I've done every mistake, and I've learned from each of them, and I have yet to have anybody object to the way I run them now, because I do them I have a very select set of rules that I hold myself to, and I believe that if you handle them correctly, then they can be a strong asset to your game experience. And if you do them wrong, your players will hate you forever. Well, maybe not forever, but it will poison the well. And it's a violation of trust. It's a violation of the social contract. You got to be careful. They're so easy to screw up, and I see why they've got a bad reputation, because everybody, like Sir Knight Black McAwesome, that has the sword of 1,000 millennias, and he's 20th levels above the party members, and he's unkillable, and he shows off, and like, why are that party even there? I mean, that's a horrible experience, as a lot of people can relate back to. I mean, like, you don't want to overshine your players. And again, we're calling the GM PCs. The concept is it's a character that's with the party that a GM controls and identifies with. It's usually more than just a casual NPC that they happen to pick up. I wouldn't call the random orc captain that they brought along with them a GM PC necessarily, especially if they're temporary. But
now, you said you had a set of rules.
Yes.
Do you have, like, are they formally written down as rules?
I have written them out before, but I've done them so much I just memorized them. What are they? Rule number 1: I always design the character to be a sidekick, not a star. They're meant to help the other players be more awesome, not be awesome themselves. They can have their moments, and usually the players will encourage that from their end to push me in those directions, and that's when I know it's okay to do the moments of awesome with them. But their key point is to basically push the story towards the players and help. Often means that they're filling roles that aren't filled. That's the primary purpose of these anyway. Like, they don't have a healer, they throw in a healer. They don't have somebody to be a frontline tank, throw in the tank, because lots of people like to play ranged characters in my group, so sometimes they just need a meat shield. So Captain McMeat Shield will show up. I usually build them in ways that's really easy to run. Sometimes some of the more boring or generic ways to design the characters so that they don't become super unique and never encroach on another player's stick with a thing that makes their character special. Don't do that. Secondly, I give my players absolute veto power over any action the character takes. So if at any point in time they're like, I don't know, I don't think they're not having fun with it, they can, boom, They can declare the action that the character takes. I have to give up some of my autonomy so that because there's been so much violation of trust in the past with these types of characters, giving that ultimate trust in the players is me saying, hey, I trust you as much as I want you to trust me. Third, they can vote him out. They can kick him out of the party anytime they want to. No hard feelings. We'll just keep going along and trucking. That is the 3 major rules I follow when I do any of these characters.
All right. I have some follow-up questions about how you run it specifically, but I also have positive experience with GM PCs. At least for a long time, my most famous character was Karkercast, the Gnome Slayer. Nope, he was a gnome giant slayer, and he was more GM NPC than he was PC. But that was a lot of the needs of how the group was running at the time. So this was the first time I got into long-form campaigns. And at the time, we didn't just put that entire burden on one GM. So it was rotating GMs set in the same world in a linear timeline. And every GM had their GM PC. So that when another GM picked up, then that player could just take that character and, he became the PC for that adventure. So as that campaign wound down and Kark just became an NPC, he was still like a core part of the party. And that's an important aspect of a GMPC. You have to make sure that he fits in the group, he fits in the dynamic. Otherwise, he's just a burden on everybody. And we'll talk about ways that GMPC can be a burden in a second. So some of the things that you didn't mention, advantages of GMPC is that he can be the guy that keeps watch. And so if everyone wakes up and you don't want to deal with the exhaustion rules, just don't. Somehow this GMP... Oh, yes?
That reminds me of my 4th rule that I forgot to tell you, because it is the absolute super important. I have to make, when I introduce a GMPC that is clearly labeled, the GMPC, here he is with his warning label equipped. I promise an absolute vow that they will never backstab the players, because if they do that even once, they will never trust you again with anything. And I have a hard enough time with them trusting any NPC they meet because of how many times it has happened in the past in written adventures, and other GMs think it's really clever, and sometimes it is, but players distrust all NPCs at this point, and so I have to make that promise and never break that promise. So if they were standing watch, like you said, that's never going to be an excuse for them to run off with a wagon full of treasure.
So I will agree with that, but I will admit that at one point we had a GMPC cleric, and the PCs went very much against that cleric's god's edicts. And I don't remember the character's name because he really was just a heal bot. And so we finished that adventure, and then that cleric just he didn't just abandon them. He reported them to someone. It wasn't very bad, but he definitely was well, I'm done with you, and now deal with the consequences that I feel you've deserved, because I'm a cleric, and I could not run a cleric without doing something like that. It just betrayed the idea that this guy was almost zealot-like.
Yeah, I can see why I can see why you made that choice, or I don't know if it was you running the character. It's just I can't. I would just have them peace out more than I would have them do any sort of retaliation, because I just need to protect that trust so badly. And if I'm going to break the fun for anybody, I'm going to break the fun for me, not my players. Which is also a great way to. They serve a lot of advantages too, but I'm interrupting your spiel on their advantages. So
no, that's fine.
First, look at the knowledge skills that they didn't take. Put them on the GMPC. Also, don't dominate like that. Just let them know you have it, so then go and let them think it's their idea to go. Hey, John Wandering McBard knowledge. Can you tell us anything about this? And that's another kicker that I do. If they're a caster, don't be the dominating super uber awesome I break the game casters. If you do put any of the super awesome this is going to win a fight spells on your spell list, don't use it. I let them see the spell list and see they can look at the character sheet anytime they want to. They give orders to the character, and the character will always follow them. And so if they see that there's a spell, I've done this before, where Black Tentacles is the Black Tentacle spell, or sleep, or deep slumber, a nice scene ender that would steal a lot of spotlight if the character cast it of his own volition. But the players feel clever if they see this and say, hey, you've got this on your spell list. Cast that on them. We're really hurting here. And then it makes them feel clever and fills in any gaps that they always make it seem like it's the player's ideas, everything that happens. This goes for just all sorts of plot reasons too. Their paranoid conjectures are the source of almost all solutions to any mysteries I introduce because it's easier.
But actually, along that line, so not only could they make the knowledge checks, but they could also remember the information that the PCs should have. And instead of it being the GM being like, you guys remember this happening, right? And, spotlighting something that is clearly going to be significant. It could be an in-character thing that encourages the characters to be like, yes, and then like interact. It's basically that same GM recall or like information recall situation played in character. But it also lets you build the world. So one of the things before Kark was introduced to our group, we were one of those groups that was like, why are there gnomes and halflings when there clearly should just be halflings? And this is before Pathfinder made gnomes a lot more interesting, like backstory wise. Kark made them enjoy gnomes, and so it meant that when I then set an adventure in a gnome village, there was a lot more buy-in because it was just a part of the game that they had no access to or interest in, that they then became, this is part of the party is doing this.
We got some, yes, totally. The exposition is the reason that J.K. Rowling has very publicly said that the reason that she put Hermione Granger as a character in the Harry Potter novels is she needed somebody to spill the exposition. And your GMPC doesn't have to be a smart character, but they have lived in the world and know the world that lives in your head. They can be the source for exposition when you need to get that out there. And it's
not only
more
when
natural.
You need it, but yeah, exactly. More natural. Instead of an info dump that it's like, this is going to be a gnome village, here's everything you need to know about gnomes. It's like, no, you have now first-hand experience with a gnome. You know what you're supposed to be getting now.
Oh, this is the tack and barrel. You need to be careful. This tavern's a real rough place, And that's a lot easier than just throwing a read aloud canned text at the characters. We got some chat questions on this topic.
All right.
Todd Done Out. I hope I got that name right. Do you allow metagaming in
I think
smaller...
it's Todd One Out.
Todd One Out? Okay. Todd One Out. Do you allow metagaming in smaller parties, especially with GMPCs? Yeah, totally. I want the game to run smooth and fast. As long as it's not breaking the game, I'm cool with that. And because of the meta issues I just talked about with the NPC, where I'm giving them the veto power for all their actions, letting them give him actions, letting him control, but letting them basically control it as if it's a video game and they clicked on his character portrait. I need to control the NPC for a little while. That little bit of breaking of the immersion helps with... I find that it helps with reducing the stress and uncertainty of the gaming. And then when we get back into the role-playing, they're more confident in that direction.
And I'm very much against it. I do not appreciate metagaming, and I do everything I can to avoid it. And in fact, having a GMPC helps avoid the metagaming because you as a person that's like, you're not just the GM waiting for a conversation between PCs to end or for them to ask you a question. You could be engaging them. You can be reminding them of in-character contextual information. And so you are using the information they should have or might have, or reminding them they don't have this information because it's metagaming, but you're doing it through the mouth of someone that their characters consider a friend or a member of the party.
Yes. Now, we got another comment that Bargle Slayer says is that you can also have players run more than one character in small parties. That's tangentially related to the topic, and I provide that's totally a valid option in small groups. I support and encourage that, but that's often overwhelming for a player to control multiple characters, especially if they're very different from each other, especially if one of them needs to be very complicated. For instance, oftentimes I have a go-to player that I go to that loves to play clerics. And so when there needs to be an extra cleric, I feel confident throwing the cleric at him. But a ninth level spellcaster is an overwhelming amount of complexity to throw at, especially if they're a new player. That's not often the option. And as a GM, more than likely you are the most knowledgeable person of the rules at the table on average. So you can usually handle, because you're running all the NPCs anyway, you're handling every class in the game going. So you can usually handle running multiple characters a lot easier than your players will. And also, players want to immerse themselves into an identity. So it's often, if that's what they want to do, I don't want to force them to split their immersion from a character that they like and a character that they kind of feel they have to have. So while I would totally allow any player that wants to grab that second character, it's not something I'm going to push on them.
So I'm going to, I don't know if this is his intention, but he does say run more than one character rather than play more than one character. So I'm going to take it another way and be like, just purely in combat, when the GM has to worry about the NPCs, he can just be like, who wants to play the GMPC? Which, if they're following our philosophy on GMPCs, it should be a straightforward build so that it doesn't dominate. It shouldn't be more powerful. And like, if it's going to be a cleric, it should be a cleric that just loves healing and all he's memorized is healing stuff so that he can fill that healing role. And if really nobody needs healing, fine, he could swing his mace. Or, a fighter will never out complex or out damage. What's the damage per round? DPR. And it will never out DPR a wizard or a dedicated arcane caster.
You got that backwards, man.
Yeah, I do not.
A dedicated arcane caster can never...
Oh, no, sorry. DPR, you're right. No, you're right.
Yeah.
It's more of a spamming thing.
They don't roll in the DPR Olympics. There's very few builds of arcane casters that not counting Magus, because that's a thing. That's
all right, there's no saving that point I was making. Let's just scrap that. But there was definitely, they won't out complex. A GM PC shouldn't out complex PCs, and so it shouldn't be that difficult to just hand it off and like let them run the mechanics, and then when it's the GM PC's turn, that player handles that GM PC, and you as the GM can just throw out some characterful dialogue or whatever to justify the actions. That may have been part of a larger point, but that's the only thing I can remember wanting to say about this point. So moving on.
Muzzlestead asks, do you think having the GMPC that's the healer gives them too much of an out not to up a group's healing skills? Okay, first off, in Pathfinder, the healing skill is nearly worthless. You have to go into class abilities, and I know that probably what you're more referring to there, but it's really hard that, hey, I want to be the fighter, to then be, I need to suddenly be also primary healer. It's not something you can easily bolt onto the side of a character concept, especially in, like, I've bemoaned the lack of healing options, of diverse healing options in Pathfinder for a long time. This goes back to all of D&D. But if my players don't want to do something, I don't want to force them to play it. So if nobody wants to play the healer and like would genuinely reduce the fun they're having at the table, the player, the GM running the healer and just making a walking heal buff bot is a much better solution than me seeing somebody having a bad time at my back corner table.
Yeah, like if you're doing a survival horror game, then yeah, you don't want to give them a healer that then undermines the game you're trying to play. Mm-hmm. But if it's just a burden that no one wants to take on, don't make them take it on. Have the back, it's almost the same as coming across the bag full of healing potions that they're going to use for the rest of the campaign, except that this bag of healing potions, maybe he has some opinions and walks around and talks to the party.
Mm-hmm. Also, if you really need to hurt somebody, you feel a lot less guilty killing the GMPC.
Okay, I'll let you have that point, and I won't argue against it, but that's not how I would handle it. Well, you really dropped the dime there. All right. Okay, so what about loot? How much of a share does GMPC get? Do you add more loot to the game to compensate the fact that there's more party members?
I assume that
what are you doing there?
I calculate as if it's a party member for how much loot gets generated. and the players decide where the loot goes.
And the GMPC has no say?
No say whatsoever.
Wow, that's different from me. I treat it like these are characters in the world, and it just makes the most sense that GMPC gets a share.
Well, usually my players are really, almost all my players are really, I guess, socialistic when it comes to the loot. Like, they never divvy up the loot. They just have this one loot list and like a bunch of bag of holdings that the loot exists in. That they just put everything in. They never divvy out the coins. They never split. It's just like, hey, who would this benefit the most right now? And then they put that on that person, and all the money just goes in the bag, and anytime they need to upgrade, they just sort of talk about like, hey, I think we need to get some more armor on the fighter. You really need a new weapon right now. And I usually find that just as the treasure that just gets generated naturally through the game, because you're going to pick a role for the additional character that isn't covered by one of the others that's supplemental. Usually the items are obvious. If you're playing a wizard, it's obvious to give him the scrolls and the rods. If you're playing a bard, you're going to give him, I don't know what bards use.
Loots.
Oh, loots. Actual loots. Great.
Yeah, we found a magical loot again. All right, give it to Bobby Bard.
If it's a fighter, that's where the plate mail goes. I mean, you get the idea. The role you feel is going to determine the loot you get anyway. And as far as money goes, I find that they want the character to not drag the party down enough that they usually just equip them appropriately. And also, just by leaving it up to the players, they again, it's a trust thing.
All right, we have an interesting question from Ad Hoc Eddie. What are the pros and cons between using a GMPC versus scaling the CR down?
Math is hard, and you have to. Okay, throwing in the GMPC is easy when it's 3 people and you need a 4th, or it's 1 person and you need a cast of characters. That means that you can just run the games as they're written. You can run the tables without doing the modifying. I find that when I run an actual solo adventure and scale the monsters and all the stuff down, my players do not have fun. Because they're like, we're fighting the easy mode of Pathfinder. We're level 7, but we're not hitting Minotaurs. We're hitting Gnoll fighters. Because, they're hitting the stuff that the adjusted CR is. And they're like, but we're not really playing full-fledged Pathfinder. We're not encountering the things that we should be, or the numbers that we should be facing. The other option is you do something like Gestalt rules, where you super hype up a character, and then that has the opposite effect, where because the spine of Pathfinder, we talked about the spine of Pathfinder a lot in the show. It's the core math of the statistics of Pathfinder is based off of, that all of D20 gaming is based off of, does not handle well when you artificially increase the power of a character, or you give them a big buff of any sort. Just giving them 5 more stat points can break a game, much less giving them a whole slew of abilities and all the guest saves, where you just basically end up with superheroes. It's the problem with Mythic has, where they're just too good at everything, so nothing is a challenge anymore.
I'm also going to say that when it comes to monsters, like the CR funnel, you would think that because all games start at 1 and they go up to 20 or whatever, you'd have the most CR1 creatures, and then you would slowly get fewer and fewer options. That's not really true. The really low CR stuff is the stuff that's the most flexible. So it's the 0 HD creatures, so that they can be a challenge for multiple levels. But if you're just lowering CRs, then that just means that they're fighting orcs and goblins and kobolds longer. And there's such a diverse range of monsters throughout all the bestiaries that lingering in the low CR area for longer makes the game less interesting.
And you have some of the iconic fights. I mean, when they're starting to get around 7th level, they're like, yeah, it's time, we're going to fight that dragon. We're going to fight a real dragon. And then if it turns out to be, it's a young adult dragon. It's a baby dragon. They don't want to be the guys who beat Pathfinder on the easy difficulty.
And plus, as we were mentioning, there's a lot of reasons besides just balance for having the GMPC.
Yeah,
I hope that was clear.
I usually don't even propose it. If they request it, I do it, and it's gotten to the point that my players ask for it. They talk about what they help design the character. That's another thing. They have a say in what is made. I ran a female dwarven. What's the dwarven defender once in a Ravenloft game because that's what they really needed. So like it needs to be super tanky. It needs to be stout. It needs to really hate giants, and so that's how that character was built. And yeah, but if it's a large party, I don't need to worry about the balance anymore. There's already enough time dividing up the spotlight that dividing up the spotlight on any of my special characters would be stealing time from the players. So once I hit like the 4, the 5, the 6 players, that's no longer even a question. They need the time. They're covering the bases, and I need to give them all the attention. Oh, another reason to run a GMPC as opposed to reducing the amount of the challenge of a game to compensate, even if you just reskinned it, basically gave everybody the young template and half as many hit points. It was another way to do it, even so you could run the monsters as is, kind of. But is that it's with a couple of small players, it's the role-playing responsibility burns them out quicker. Immersing yourself into a game, some people can do it endlessly. Some people, it's a lot of challenge. And for all people, just getting into the character and doing all the math of the game and having all the spotlight all the time without any breaks is a lot to ask of somebody. So having a couple of characters that can just give them, here's 5-minute breather. He's going to go on a little bit of an exposition. He's going to start talking. He's going to take a couple of combat turns, that sort of thing. Give you a time to breathe and think and get ready to do this without me having to call a 5-minute break.
There's a couple of other points I'm just going to make quickly. You can plot out a GMPC's character arc better than you can a PC. Mm-hmm. And they will have more interaction with it than an NPC. So they can actually see a GMPC growing as a person. Like if they start as a very low confident character and then by the last combat they do something really big, they aren't going to be like, oh, the GMPC stole the thunder. They're going to be like, look how far you've come, character that I have a personal connection with. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Like play it like it's an important person in the lives of the PCs, not like it's an important character in the like tactics of the party.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and if you're doing it wrong, your group will let you know.
Yeah.
Maybe not openly, but the grumbles and the groans and the decisions and why are they always the ones to check the door for traps, even though they don't have trap finding, it'll become obvious.
All right, Param. GMPCs. Do you want to just rapid fire go through your rules again and do's and don'ts?
Okay. First, make a supporting character a sidekick, not a star of the show. Your goal is to make the other players feel more awesome, fill gaps, and basically support their play styles and make sure that they can have the fun that they came to the table for. Secondly, allow the players to have veto over the NPC so that they do not feel that it is a violation of trust, that they can, anytime that's doing something or stealing too much spotlight or they just get offended, they can absolutely take care of it. It also prevents them from you doing something they think is stupid and is going to get the party killed. Yeah. Also, give them the right to vote it off the island. That if they have the ultimate say and consent on whether or not this thing is in their party. And finally, and I forgot my finally. What was my number 4?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
It was about GMPCs.
I had a number 4, and I forgot it in the course
remember
of this
you saying number 4.
Because I interrupted you and said that that's what it's about. Oh, well.
Well, I was going to say that about wraps things up. We'll be right back with the shout-outs. But that does not wrap things up well, Param. I was going to compliment you. You ruined my transition.
No. Oh, yeah. Ad hoc has no backstabbing. You have to make sure they trust the character and vow that this is a character that they can absolutely trust and will never backstab them or betray the party. The second you do that the first time is the last time you ever get to do that.
I like Monica swoops in and just says, trust.
Yes.
I don't know if I haven't seen her in chat at all, but it's like she knew we needed her.
Yep. So we're going to wrap this up?
Yeah, let's wrap things up right after this.
And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 161 of No Direction, the Pathfinder Sorry, Pam. I feel like I've been screwing up the wrap-up spiel a lot lately, so I apologize. Thank you for joining us for episode 161 of No Direction, and thank you to our guest, Troy LaValle.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go, we just want to bring your attention to a couple of interesting things that are happening around the internet, not necessarily Pathfinder related. I had a couple. They both became news items. So, Param, do you have anything to shout out to?
Yeah, I do. I want to shout out to Hero Forge. They have a new update that a lot of people were excited to hear about. That update is they have now allowed you to download your character and print it yourself if you have a 3D printer, or your buddy has one, or there's a 3D printer service you prefer to use that isn't them. Here's a hint: if you're going to send it to Shapeways, just use them. Their price is the same, and that's who they use. But if you have your own,
Shapeways even uses Hero Forge in a lot of their advertisement.
Yeah,
it's a very well-known association between the two.
Yeah. And they have a better printer than you're likely to have. But if you want that character file, if you want to be able to print it off, you can now pay. It's just $10 for the download instead of paying for the full price of the print, and you can print it yourself. And that was a fun addition, and I'm glad that you now have that choice. Another shout out I wanted to give is now, full disclosure, I used to work for these guys, but Fat Dragon Games has currently been known a lot for their 3D terrain, their do-it-yourself 3D terrain products. Lately, they've been doing 3D printed stuff. It's been super phenomenally successful for them, but they got their start with papercraft, and some of the days I prefer the papercraft because it's so much easier to customize and it takes a lot less time to build. The downside of 3D printing: one dungeon corner piece. And corner pieces is the ones you need the most, actually. Of all the pieces that you need to build a 3D dungeon, you need corner pieces more than any other, because every room has 4 of them.
Yeah.
4 hours. It takes 4 hours to print that.
Why?
Because that's how long it takes the printer to exude the plastic in the shape of a corner piece. 3D printing is a great process, but incredibly slow. But they have made several of their really good papercraft sets. Some of the core papercraft sets, Easy Dungeons, Easy Chasms of Chaos are the two I'm seeing right here. Also a bunch of expansions for it on Drive-Thru RPG are now just pay what you want for them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So whatever you think it's worth. I love these products. There was some of my first interest in getting into the industry was because of the work I was doing with these products, and building 3D stuff is fun and easy and ups your game table a little bit, and this stuff is really cheap to make.
Param, I remembered something that I wanted to shout out to, and that is Tyranny and Manipulation actually came out. People that are longtime listeners of the show might remember Tyranny and Manipulation as the follow-up to Strategists and Tacticians, my first third-party publishing major project, and that was released by Four Winds Fantasy Gaming, who went under, and where they were bought out by Purple Duck Games. And I'd actually forgotten the conversation I had with Purple Duck Games, or actually I misremembered it. I thought that they returned the rights to Tyranny and Manipulation to me, but that was not the case at all. And so I'm glad that I never put the effort into shopping it around. No, they actually bought the rights out because originally the contract was for a share of the profits. But no, they bought it outright from me. So they've owned it all this time. And they just finally got around to releasing it. It's a big book. It's like 80,000 words. And the idea is, the subtitle is, it's a Game Master's Secret Weapons. And it's not a GM book in the same way that most GM books are. So when this was originally conceived, all GM books were advice books. Mm-hmm. Again, this is a very old project.
And toolboxes.
Yes, and toolboxes, which are fine, but this is a toy box. This is the Advanced Player's Guide, but for GMs. So it's a lot of options that work better for NPCs than they work for PCs. The best example is there's a Cavalier archetype that instead of having a mount, you have a litter and you have 4 workers. It doesn't have to be slaves, but you have 4 people that carry you around in your litter as your mount. And that is not a workable PC concept, but that is some fun area to play around with when you're designing an NPC and a villain. So, yeah, Tyranny and Manipulation has 2 new base classes. Oh, what were they called? One of them is the Shepherd, I believe, and one of them is the Reaper. And the Reaper gets more powerful when it kills. Like, it uses souls as a power source. And the Shepherd, I remember being a lot of fun, but I don't remember what it does, Param. Honestly, I'm looking forward to getting my copy so I can remind myself what this book was all about.
This was years ago.
Years ago. So it has 30 new archetypes. That's 1 for each class, base class that existed from Paizo at the time. And at one point, I remember, this was before the Magus came out, and I was debating adding a Magus archetype because they had not done anything with it. And I was like, well, it would be weird for all classes except for the Magus. But again, that was a long time ago. 75 new feats, 24 new spells. Mutations is a new option. So it's basically they look like magic item, but the flavor, they work like magic items, but the flavor is that you are just doing terrible things to your body and intentionally putting yourself through body horror. And hazardous environments. Sorry?
You did that just so they couldn't loot the treasure.
Partially. Maybe. But also, there's still barely any mutant options in the game, and that's strange, isn't it?
Yeah. They can't all be alchemists.
Oh, Param, you'll be happy to know that the Hordes template has finally been added to the game.
Woohoo!
I can't believe that would still have been relevant up until a year or so ago. Although I guess with the Reign of Winter, they had it there, but it never made it into a bestiary. Oh, and I forgot about this, man. This is a blast from the past, Param. Simplified versions of 17 base classes to cut down on prep time. So it just takes the abilities that they have, and it's just like, but here's basically what it does, and you're losing all your options, but it's like really easy to run. Mm-hmm. This is what a GM wants these classes to be.
But that's what came out later in Ultimate Campaign, or no, Unchained. Unchained had those in them. So this is an interesting little time capsule.
Yeah, it was ahead of its time, and now it's not.
No.
But you know what? I do remember being really proud and having a lot of fun with it. Mm-hmm. So I recommend people, it's only $10, which is, I think, a good price for 80,000 words, which is several hundred pages. I believe it's at least 200 pages. Mm-hmm. Check it out if you're really just curious. It's such a weird situation. I didn't even know it came out. Purple Duck didn't let me know. A listener posted on our Facebook wall. So Tyranny and Manipulation. You can get your hands on it now. And I'm just trying to find the listener so I can credit them. Meanwhile, Param, why don't you let people know what was happening on our website recently?
Ooh, okay. All right. Well, what was happening last week? We're going to lead off, as we often do, because her blog comes out the day after this podcast comes out, with Inspire Confidence, written by Monica Marlowe, How I Learned to Love the Story. She's talking with how she got involved in the LARP scene using the White Wolf Storyteller system. It's a fun read. Go and do it. It's very detailed and goes into a lot of emotional places. But, hey, if you were ever interested in LARPing or just want to know more about things, go read. Next up, Monstrous Physique from Luis Loza, where he did the Enthrallar Wasp. Yeah, I'm scared of wasps anyway. I'm especially scared of wasps that can mind control me. CR5 critter. Creepy. Alright, next up, Iconic Design. I love this one. I really did. Alex Agunas, his article is, how can something so fluffy be so terrifying? Which is where he built a Kitsune Hell Knight that focuses on intimidation and all the lovely things that can happen if you max out intimidation. It's like Mesmerist Fighter Hell Knight combination to get this. Like many of his builds, sometimes it is an amalgamation of awfulness that comes in to be a horrible thing of awesome potential. And it's just imagining this fluffy, poofy Hell Knight that is somehow scary. I'm just imagining like a chihuahua wearing a suit of armor. Next up is Code Switch 4th of Aristus Special, written by James Ballard, which talks about the basically it came out for the 4th of July. It talks about the American it talks about the founding of America, and yeah. Next up, we have Keyword Design by Luis Loza. You'll have to handle this one because I saw it as Keyword Design and thought you wrote it. So I figured you'd talk about it.
Not this time. I've been busy working on PaizoCon coverage, and so Luis was willing to take over responsibility instead of just letting another week go by without a keyword design. The word is encapsulate. And this is one of these. So it was suggested by Peter, and Peter he just one day sent me like 6 or so very science-based words with very specific meanings. And this is the second time we've taken a Peter suggestion. So encapsulate, Luis came up with the sealed sack, which is an airtight bag to protect things from water damage. The revitalizing screen, magical shield that blocks damage and can renew. Oh yeah, that was basically the Halo energy shield. And I'm very happy that he came up with an Arcanist option for the class option, which was capture spell. So, encapsulate is in trap. That's sometimes what you have to do with the keyword design, Param. I completely sympathize with Luis justifying capture spell as an encapsulate option. But I'm very happy with this because I'm trying to do a new class option, like a different class every time before I ever do the same class a second time. And I have no idea how the Arcanist works. It's one of the classes I'm the least familiar with. So I'm really glad that Luis chose that one to create an option for. I feel like I can take it off my list for a while.
Next up after that is Behind the Screens from Anthony Lee, where he talks about putting the fantasy into sci-fi. With Starfinder coming out, it's a science fantasy game, not a science fiction game. He talks about what that means, and then he goes into some of the details on how the different planets would how you can take aspects of what we know about our fantasy setting and apply them to the different planets and how they behave to run those in similar fashions. He more specifically talks about the Fae and how they can be related with some of the aliens on some of the other planets. Next up was Luis Loza, again with the wandering monster, The Farm. So, it's a nice big farm battle map, really tiny house, and of course it is dominated by evil farmers and creepy satanic children.
Children of the Corn. Mm-hmm. I would not have let him release that if he hadn't put Children of the Corn in there.
Mm-hmm. Next up past that is Guidance, Unchain or Die, the Bard. Alex had poked the beehive with this one. It's a really good read where he points out that the Bard is a good class, but it does one thing really well, and it doesn't have a lot of options. And one of its core abilities is so powerful that you often don't want to swap it out for anything else because there's just not a lot of other options that are worth it. It's a fun read. Go through some of the mental exercises where you examine a class that a lot of people don't think a lot about past the initial presentation of it. And then a lot of our fans express their disagreement enthusiastically.
And I disagreed with a lot of the disagreement because I think Alex really explained not just that he wanted a more powerful bard or that he wanted bards that could do things other classes could do. He just wanted to be able to do what the bard does in more ways.
Right. Because right now, really, the bard you've got, if you build the core bard in an optimal way after playing Pathfinder a few times, your only choice is, am I melee or am I bow?
Yeah.
All right. Burst of Insight, Andrew Marlowe. This was First Contact inspired stat blocks. First Contact has hit for Free RPG Day. You can also buy copies of it off of Paizo.com if you were not lucky enough to get a copy at a Free RPG Day or there wasn't a Free RPG Day in your area. And the PDF is completely free. It's $5 to get a print copy shipped to you. And PDF is free. But and it's the first sneak peek we had at the Starfinder stat blocks officially. Here's a hint. It's the Unchained stat blocks. Which I'm happy with that because I've advocated those replacing the Paizo stat blocks entirely. He goes by... He walks around using that as inspiration in some of the changes they've done to bring that back into your Pathfinder games, because let's face it, this stealing the trade of exchange of concepts and house rules needs to go both ways with these systems. If Starfinder finds a new revolutionary way to do something, I'm going to totally steal it for my Pathfinder games. And finally, releasing today was Dear Dova Queen, Building an Undungeon. Ryan, you helped proof this one, so why don't you give me the description?
Sure. Well, if you think about it, Dungeons and Dragons, the game that's is the precursor to Pathfinder, it's kind of weird what we came to think of as a dungeon. It wasn't just a hole below a castle where you keep your prisoners. It was an entire labyrinth of stone underground corridors full of monsters. Didn't always make sense. And so the question is basically saying, like, can we just get away from the whole dungeon crawl thing? And how do you incorporate ecology, geology, basically logic? How do you make this just underground stone pit into a place that these monsters that live there could actually live there? And so Lauren addresses both aspects of that question. One, how to make a dungeon that isn't just a dungeon, and also that bringing in real world things and really figuring out the ecology of a dungeon makes the dungeon feel better, because they'll walk into a room and it'll be like, why is there this thing here? And then the more they learn about how the dungeon works, your players will then go back and be like, that's why that room had that thing there. It totally makes sense, because without that thing, this whole place falls apart. So, but she also really goes into a lot of interesting ideas about how, instead of having the traditional underground dungeon, you use the environment and you use environmental hazards to simulate the confines, the claustrophobic nature of a dungeon. And it's something that the next time that you are designing your own adventure and you want to do a dungeon crawl, but you're looking for other options, there's a lot of really good advice in here for that.
And that brings us up to now, when the next thing I would talk about is this show. So, hey, you've listened to this show. And we want to point out that if you go to nodirectionpodcast.com, that that was where you'll encounter not just this show and our other shows on our network, which are fantastic listening and or watching, as to whichever you prefer, but some of the best blog content for Pathfinder put out frequently. Nearly every day we have content. Something new to come check out the website for. Please, you're missing out if you're not paying attention. Now,
until next time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
If you want to get in touch with us for No Direction, you can get in touch with us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/NoDirection. If you want to visit our website, which we just talked about, nodirectionpodcast.com, where we have fantastic blog content nearly every day. And not weekends. We don't work weekends. Nobody works weekends. Well, people that work weekends, we're very sorry. And of course, you can follow us.
I'm not sorry. Maybe they want it that way.
You can follow us on our not very frequently updated Twitter. What's our Twitter account, Ryan?
Something about No Direction?
Oh, sorry. Never mind about our Twitter account. We will talk it. And No Direction Show on YouTube.
At No Direction.
Oh, yeah. At No Direction. Great. And No Direction Show on YouTube, where our YouTube channel is, where you can find the video archive of all of these episodes, usually right after it airs. And, come check us out. If you want to support the show, one of the best ways you can do that is by subscribing to us on all of those fronts, liking us on Facebook, subscribing to us on YouTube, following us on Twitch. I'm not really sure what you do on Twitter. I think it's also follow. And spread the love. If you see something on the show you like, spreading it around on social network helps us get new people to join in on the conversation.
Until next time.
Until next time.
I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Baron.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.